Hi everyone. Good to see you on my channel today. Today I will tell you a wonderful story. It is full of love and kindness. I hope you enjoy it and I wish you an enjoyable viewing experience. Thank you.
Lillian was in a bad mood today, and this despite the fact that while driving, she was always distracted by looking at the road, running a ribbon in the distance. A yellow sedan with nice checkers on the roof was driving along the highway, swaying from side to side in time with the roughness of the road, like a boat on small waves. Suddenly, the voice of her 7-year-old daughter, Kayla, sitting to her right in a special child seat, brought her out of her sad thoughts. "Mom, how long are we going to work today? Because I'm already hungry." "Now we'll do one more order, and then we'll take a break for a snack." "Okay," Lillian asked hopefully. "Sure, I'll be patient. What did you have for lunch today?" "A sandwich or pancakes?" Kayla persisted. Lillian winked mysteriously at her daughter. "I won't tell you. Let it be a secret. I'm sure you'll love it." The little girl's face lit up with a sweet smile, the kind that all children have in the world, without exception. At the sight of this beautiful picture, Lillian's heart warmed noticeably. So what if she lost today's divorce case? Let her husband choke on his capital. They were useless as it was. Mentally agreeing with that statement, Lillian smiled at her reflection in the rearview mirror and accepted the dispatcher's call. "Bus station. 2 passengers, a man and a woman, will be waiting at the entrance." "I've already told the customers your license plate number," the dispatcher said in a well-practiced voice. "Copy that, Jordan." "Thank you." "I'm not too far from here," she said and shifted gears, glancing furtively at Kayla. Lillian noticed that her daughter had dozed off, but that was okay. One more order and a break, she reassured herself. Lillian didn't like taking her daughter to work with her, but there was no one to leave her with. The owner of the rented apartment did not tolerate children and said so right away. Her mother lived in the village, where she worked from dawn to dusk on the local farm to provide for her disabled youngest son. Lillian's brother, Scott, used to work as a tractor driver, but after an accident on the road, he became permanently blind and moved into a wheelchair. His wife left him. The only family left is Lillian's sister and mom. There was no way to leave a little girl in her care when things were already going badly, and Kayla had always liked to be naughty, so she needed constant supervision. Lillian spotted the customers named by the dispatcher at once. They were standing there, holding small travel bags. The couple looked to be just over 30. Probably married, Lillian thought with a hint of envy, and flashed her headlights at the customers. She didn't signal because she was afraid of waking her daughter. The child would get a good night's sleep if the passengers were not talkative. Lillian's hunch was correct. The couple greeted her politely and made themselves comfortable in the back, closing the door quietly without slamming, which in itself pleased Lillian. Good customers treated the car with respect rather than banging the doors for nothing. When the strangers saw the little girl sleeping in front of them, they became quiet and whispered. "We're going to a hotel, please." "What is the cheapest one here?" a man asked in a low voice. Lillian nodded understandingly. "Okay, we'll do it. There's one here. Aurora's called. The service there is good. The prices are reasonable. I lived there with my daughter for a while, too." "Thank you. We are very grateful to you," said a passenger. For a moment there was silence in the cabin. Lillian had been in her profession for many years, so she was used to adjusting to the client. If a person who likes to talk sits down, she has already prepared several crowning stories on any topic. Funny and sad, long and not so long. And if a silent man is caught, Lillian keeps her neutrality and just enjoys the engine's murmur or loud music. She didn't turn on the receiver now. Let Kayla sleep for a while. Maybe she'll wake up with renewed vigor. Meanwhile, the passengers behind her began to talk softly. Lillian had gotten used to it long ago, and she let other people's conversations pass her ears. But this time she couldn't do that. And first of all, because they mentioned her surname Clark, or rather, not even her own, but the surname of her husband Nicholas. Lillian herself was a little embarrassed by this surname, considering it not at all suitable for a woman. But what can you do when she made her own choice at the registry office? The man was the first to speak. So are you all set? Clark's definitely going to hire us. The woman hesitated for a moment, then said, "Yes, you don't have to worry. I've got it all figured out. I'm going to work in his office as a janitor. In the meantime, you watch from the sidelines. Nicholas won't be able to get away with it this time. I bet he can't take a punch like that." Lillian hit the brake in surprise, causing her yellow car to freeze like a stumbling block. The passengers were visibly agitated, and Lillian took a breath. She had good reflexes. But it was a good thing there was no one behind her, or she'd be in trouble. But Kayla didn't notice her mother's maneuver because she was still snoozing sweetly in her baby seat. "What's wrong? Why did we stop?" the man asked. Lillian immediately pulled herself together and answered, "Nothing, there's no need to worry. It's all right. There was just a pothole up ahead, so I stopped to go around it." The passenger shook his head doubtfully, but refused to comment further. But Lillian couldn't think of anything else but the conversation between the two strange passengers the rest of the way. At first she thought the conversation was about some other person. But when the woman mentioned the name of her husband Nicholas, everything fell into place. Not knowing what to do with this information, Lillian hesitated. Of course, she immediately realized that something evil was being plotted against her ex-husband. But what could she personally do about it? One, the scoundrel who left her and her daughter with practically nothing. Or refused to follow her conscience and accept everything as it was. She did not know the answer to that question. Meanwhile, the hotel complex appeared ahead, and the passengers prepared to pay the fare. A woman was paying the fare, and she took out her purse and handed Lillian a couple of bills, slightly larger than the amount to be paid. "Here, take the change. No need buy something for your daughter. She's a real sweetheart. A real doll." Lillian smiled embarrassedly and thanked the customer for the tip. It didn't seem like much, but it felt good. She started the engine and drove on to her favorite spot on the riverbank where she and Kayla always had a bite to eat. In spite of her own will, Lillian's thoughts returned again and again to Nicholas, who had won her divorce. And that was all right, he'd won, so what the hell? No alimony in part of the business, so let him be happy. Lillian didn't need it, but they bought the house with joint money. And Lillian's mom also contributed to the joint venture. For several years, she saved up to give her daughter a gift for the wedding. A gift, not payment for the event itself, as some parents did. Samantha knew firsthand what hard times were like, so she wanted to give her daughter as much as she could. Not $1 million, of course, but still not a penny. But Nicholas reasoned in his own way. and in the divorce simply forgot about the fact that the house was bought on the common money. Convinced who needed, fake documents held, and voila, the scam succeeded to glory. To tell the truth, Lillian did not expect that her husband would treat her and her daughter so cruelly. Not only that Noah Lamoni was not going to pay, but also took the house. Lillian was taken aback by the surprise, but Nicholas's lawyer cleverly provided the court with documents, as well as the results of a DNA test to verify the paternity of Nicholas and Kayla's daughter. Wait. What test? When did you have time to do that? What the hell is going on? Don't they require the mother's consent in these cases? Lillian exclaimed. In response, the judge called for silence and began to study the papers. Lillian was well aware that the test was fake. After all, Kayla could have only one father, Nicholas, and no one else. But the businessman's lawyer did not eat his bread in vain and quickly made up a fake paper. And the calculation was on the surprise and ignorance of Lillian laws. She thought it was a divorce and alimony court, but it turned out that she lost not only the house, but also payments for her daughter. No, there was still child support, of course, but Lillian and Kayla couldn't count on anything else. For Nicholas, it was a moment of personal triumph. Grinning wickedly, he kissed his mistress in front of Lillian and flaunted her like a peacock in love. Only the tail feathers were missing, but everything was the same. Tears ran down Lillian's cheeks. Her husband's betrayal hurt her to the core. How can the earth bear you? To deprive his wife and child of a roof over their heads. How will you look in the mirror after this? It's a disgrace, Lillian exclaimed. Nicholas grinned. Oh, come on. You do not need to take me on conscience. Enough, past already. It is simply impossible to live with you. No intelligence, no imagination. You're a bore. I feel good. My blood is boiling in my veins. That's what a real woman is, not like you, a country bumpkin. At that moment, Lillian had a sudden urge to slap the bastard, but she had to restrain herself. There are people around. What difference would it make? Only the humped man's grave can be fixed. Trying to chase away the intrusive visions, Lillian wiped her eyes with her hand and turned her attention to the road. She liked to listen to the peaceful noise of the engine and to drive the car as if she were part of the whole. Lillian had learned to drive in elementary school, when her grandfather had trusted her with the wheel of his old Zyguli. Naturally, Patrick himself was beside her and controlled every step of his granddaughter. And although now Grandpa was already in heaven, she remembered his science with warmth in her heart. She learned not only to masterfully drive the car, but also to distinguish by the sound of breakdowns and all sorts of nuances of the engine. And now, returning from a call, Lillian felt that something was obviously wrong with the car. It was nothing critical, of course, but it wouldn't hurt to stop by the repair shop after the shift. At that moment, Kayla, who was sitting in the baby seat, woke up and looked at her mom with a smile. "Mom, are you done yet? Can we take a break?" Lillian smiled back. "Absolutely. We will take a break. We'll stop at the riverbank now. It's close to the beach and the gazebo there." "Yay, finally. I'm getting hungry. I had breakfast this morning, but I'm hungry again." Lillian patted her daughter on the shoulder. "Well, you're growing up. You know, girls always pull up faster than boys, so the body needs fuel. Oh, come on. Let's see what I made for you." Lillian took for a snack not only pancakes, but also sandwiches, thus making for her daughter a kind of mix of her favorite foods. The pancakes were not simple, but had a savory flavor that was enhanced by the raisins added to them. Kayla looked at the river and admired the people swimming, sunbathing, and fishing in the reeds a little farther away. Lillian was not happy about the river today. She was far away in her thoughts and still could not decide what she should do with the information she had received. Naturally, going to the police with such a thing was not an easy task. But what would she tell the officer on duty? That she overheard someone deciding to get a job at her ex-husband's company as a cleaner, and someone else should be watching her from the sidelines. That's ridiculous. Lillian hesitated for a moment, then realized this information really needed to be shared with someone else. Best of all, with their time-tested friend Taylor, who always found the right answer in difficult situations. Though sometimes Taylor was quite stubborn and stood her ground until the last minute. During their previous conversation, she had strongly insisted that Lillian file a second lawsuit in court and have an independent DNA test done to confirm Nicholas and Kayla's parentage. Lillian sighed sadly. Why would I want to do that, Taylor? I don't want to see him, let alone be around him, and I don't want Bonnie's money. Lillian smiled. Do you think they'll bring bad luck? Here I lived with him side by side all these years and only tormented. And Nicholas has constant business trips, delays, late returns, and excuses. Taylor nodded understandingly. It's as clear as day. Men, they're all like that, especially the ones with money. As soon as something comes up, they have the wind in their heads, and it's like a calculator in their brains, starting to turn all the beauties of the city into potential lovers. It's just that each one has a different price tag attached to her dress. Lillian smiled again. Taylor's position had been clear to her for a long time, since she had once gone through a painful divorce, just like Lillian. True, her husband had not been rich, and unlike Nicholas, had left her for a wealthy mistress because of extreme poverty. Subsequently, he has not once regretted it, and even tried to go back. But here Taylor betrayal could not forgive, and slammed the door in front of the nose of the former lover. Waiting until her daughter had lunch, Lillian called the dispatcher and said that she would not be taking orders today. But Jordan was sympathetic, as he had once been a cab driver himself, but now he was in a wheelchair after an accident. Everyone knew that Lillian rarely finished a day early, and if she did, there was a good reason for it. At first, when Lillian had joined their transportation company, she had received nothing but ridicule. The owner of the company had never dealt with a female driver before, so he decided to give her a test. For this purpose, he gave her the oldest car available at the time. As you might expect, it was simply impossible to drive it. Breakdowns followed one after another. So Lillian had to spend time in the workshops, where she was up to her elbows in oil and fuel oil, helping the mechanics to repair the car. To the young cab driver's credit, it should be said that she never complained about her fate and accepted with humility what she was given to use. Lillian did not have her own car, otherwise she would have gone private. In the meantime, Lillian could only count on the help and assistance of the director of the depot. Unnoticed by herself, she improved her repair skills and was soon able to fix minor breakdowns on her own. And after a while, her old car began to bring the owner a decent income, as it practically never broke down. Many cab drivers envied Lillian, not understanding what the secret of her success was. As it turned out, everything was simple hard work, diligence, and enviable endurance. And also, despite everything, unlike most female cab drivers, Lillian was not afraid to take male customers and kept a pepper spray with her, just in case. To the honor of the passengers, it should be said that she had never met any outright scoundrels. Most often drunken men behaved swaggeringly and confessed their love to Lillian, but it never went any further than that. She only smiled, always answering in an emphatically polite manner and never escalating the situation. In addition, Lillian was indifferent to alcohol, which also played into her hands. Unfortunately, the lion's share of her earnings went to rent a house because Nicholas left her and her daughter homeless. Harper was an odd hostess, and Lillian had never learned to feel comfortable with her. From time to time, she made her own claims and tried to increase the price of rent in order to profit at the expense of the young cab driver. But the woman did not even realize that Lillian's earnings were not as much as she thought. After all, the single divorced woman has a daughter growing up, and she also dreams of buying her own car and engage in private transportation. Of course, quite legally, having discovered self-employment. The male cab drivers only laughed. You should not go into privateering. A car is only an expense, but it's useless. Here, of course, part of your income will have to be paid back, but they give you some kind of transportation. And in case of emergency, insurance will cover all possible expenses. When you're self-employed, it's a lot harder. But she knew she wanted her freedom and dreamed of a better schedule than the one she had now. Finally, when Kayla had eaten, Lillian gave her a set of wet wipes for the little girl to wipe her hands with. Then she got behind the wheel and started the engine. Where are we going now? Back to work, Kayla asked. You guessed it, Lillian smiled enigmatically. We're going to visit Aunt Taylor. I already called her. She'll be waiting. You can play video games with Colin or play catch in the yard while we talk. Kayla's eyes lit up with joy. Wow, that's quite a gift. You've been making me happy all day today. You've made such a delicious lunch, and now you're coming to visit. And she always has such delicious candies in vases. Lillian smiled, catching herself thinking that her daughter obviously didn't get enough sweets, because they had to save money all the time. Like any intelligent woman, the young mother realized that the lion's share of her income was spent on rent. On the other hand, they could not stay in the open air, and they needed their own car like air. As it became clear, in 10 minutes Taylor was already waiting for mother and daughter to visit, having put on the table treats and poured a cup of fragrant tea with bergamot. But Kayla didn't touch the tea, as she immediately ran to play with Taylor's son. Colin had more than enough toys, and that's why the girl who was used to Spartan conditions was ready to play with cars and soldiers, and even shoot a toy gun. Well, tell me what you've come with. I don't think you finished your workday early to see me again, Taylor asked with a squint. Lillian blushed embarrassedly. Her friend was very perceptive, she said. There was no hiding anything from her. In fact, Taylor realized right away that Lillian was in some kind of trouble. Patrick, I don't know what to say. Lillian didn't even know where to begin. Taylor frowned. This was the first time she'd seen her friend like this. Usually Lillian either said what she thought right away or put it off until next time, digesting the problems inside her. But today she was acting very strangely. Taking a sip of her tea, Taylor decided to wait for her friend to come clean. Fortunately, Lillian didn't want to keep her in suspense and got to the point. As she listened, Taylor shook her head and couldn't believe that such a thing was possible. At the end of the story, she propped her chin up with her hand and asked, "So what are you going to do next? I hope you don't tell your ex that he's in danger. You know, to be honest, I don't think they can eliminate him literally. It's probably a robbery or something. But you can't take a slippery guy like your Nicholas with your bare hands, so it's far from certain that this couple will succeed. Lillian sighed sadly. Oh, I don't know whether to tell Taylor or not, I don't know if I should say anything, It's understandable, of course. No one said that retribution in life should not be. But like they say, don't judge and you won't be judged. Maybe these people are preparing serious crimes, and by my silence, I'm becoming their silent accomplice. Taylor waved her hands in protest. Oh, come on, girl. You're having a debate. What is there to think about? Your husband left you homeless and broke, and he's embarrassed you all over town. And you're wondering if you should just keep your mouth shut. Where's your pride? Can you imagine him laughing now at the way he managed to fool you? Lillian shook her head doubtfully. There was something deep inside her that kept her from betraying her ex-husband. She could make a mess of things if she wanted to. But she always did it honestly, demonstratively, not secretly, as Nicholas had done to her. Taylor, I haven't made up my mind yet, but I think I'll tell the truth. Let him decide what he wants to do next. It might be a mistake, but I think I'm doing the right thing. Otherwise, I'll just lose my peace. I can't live like this. My heart's not in the right place. And what's next? What if something happens to Nicholas? No, it's not for me. I'd rather let him know he's in danger. He's got his own head on his shoulders, and he'll figure it out. Taylor sighed disappointedly. And I understand your task, and I'm ready to start editing the text according to the specified requirements. Here's the edited portion. Well, Chelsea, you've grown up, and you're no good to me. You're too moral, too honest. You don't always have to do the right thing in life. Sometimes you have to cheat. Otherwise, you won't survive. The sharks will eat you up, and you're as defenseless as a child. You'd think you'd lose your daughter's alimony because of some fake paperwork. Couldn't you have gotten a D in a retest? I advised you to get a good lawyer, but you did it all on your own. That's the result. Her friend's words struck a nerve. How would she do if she had been brought up like this? Her grandmother worked as a school teacher and was always in good standing. Mom still works as a milkmaid on the farm. Her earnings are honest, legal, just like her late father and brother. But lies and deceit always come out. No matter how hard you try to hide the truth, it will come out. After sitting around for a while longer, Lillian said goodbye to Taylor and left in frustration. Kayla dutifully followed and became increasingly silent, sensing her mom's foul mood. At this very same time, a very different scene was unfolding in Nicholas Clark's office. Seeing the new cleaner on the threshold of his office, the director playfully winked at the future employee. Well, with such an impressive form and resume, we will definitely work together. However, I warn you at once, I have no absences, maternity leave, and other nonsense. The work is difficult, but does not require mental labor. Paid on time, 1 vacation a year. Subject to fruitful cooperation, 13th salary. So I recommend you to look at our firm seriously. The new cleaner's name was Elizabeth. The office staff immediately noticed her manner of dress and the exquisite manicure on her thin, pianist-like fingers. More like a mannequin or a model. Look how she walks, twists her hips as if on the catwalk, someone whispered. As you know, you can't hide anything from women, especially if they work side by side. As for the question of beauty and manner of dress, Nicholas liked Elizabeth at first sight, and when he saw her, he immediately forgot about his mistress Sydney, for whom he left his wife and twisted the scam with the house and the alimony. Sydney wasn't in the office at the time. Here's the edited text to your specifications. Elizabeth was therefore able to use her charms as she saw fit. Smiling, she sat down on the edge of her chair and looked at the headmaster with eyes in which he could easily drown. Then Elizabeth flirtatiously fluttered her eyelashes. Why, does the businessman have a busy heart right away? Tell me, do you have any career prospects? You know, from a cleaning lady to a higher position. No, I'm not saying that immediately in a month and a half, Elizabeth asked with a slight bite of her lip. The sound of her voice made Nicholas shudder without wanting to. He reached for the knot of his tie to loosen it and breathe in the fresh air cooled by the air conditioner. Actually, we don't have that for janitors, but if you need it, I can make adjustments. I'll need your full commitment, though. I think you know what I mean, Nicholas replied in a shaky voice. With Elizabeth, he felt like a high school boy who was on his first date with an experienced beauty. Elizabeth looked him in the eye again. She did it almost without blinking, as if she didn't have eyes, but instead blue lakes or azure skies. Well, thank you for your help, Nicholas. I'll take your wishes into consideration, and I hope I don't disappoint you, Elizabeth said in the same languid voice, and walked gracefully out of the study. Nicholas's heart pounded like a fish caught in a net. At that moment he was ready to part with Sydney here, and now for the sake of this beauty, who for some reason got a job in his office. What was this? Someone's calculated plan or heavenly providence? Nicholas did not even realize that only a couple of hours ago this woman in a completely different guise was traveling with his ex-wife Lillian, and did not imagine anything special. Caught in the net of a fatal beauty, Nicholas completely lost his head and could not think of anyone else but Elizabeth. It should be said that the new cleaner did her job perfectly. So she could not only make eyes, but also clean the floor, tidy up the window panes and steps at the entrance. It was also interesting that the office staff could not understand what they liked about Elizabeth. In fact, if you think about it, she had no special beauty, and her face, as well as all ordinary people, had its microscopic flaws. But as soon as Elizabeth looked at someone with her big blue eyes, the interlocutor immediately forgot about the essence of the conversation and became an unwilling victim of the convenient and insidious temptress. From the outside, it rather resembled a hunting scene, when a slow, graceful predator hypnotizes a rabbit as fast as lightning with its cold and piercing eyes. A week passed, during which not a day passed without Lillian picking up the telephone to call Nicholas. In her soul, it was as if an angel and a demon were battling, trying to capture the heart of this pure, naive woman. Of course, Lillian wanted to save Nicholas, to warn him. But on the other hand, she didn't know what exactly was being talked about in the car. Losing sleep and peace, Lillian became afraid that she would not be able to drive the car or even fall asleep at the wheel. So one day she decided to call her ex-husband and tell him the truth. Since the phone was not picked up the first time, she overcame her pride and dialed again. And that's when she heard Nicholas's disgruntled voice. "Hello, what do you want? I think all decided. I have no money, do not even ask. And someone else's child I'm not going to bring up." Lillian was momentarily speechless with indignation. What does a child have to do with it? Especially since Kayla is your daughter and you know it. But you don't have to play to the public. You think I'm bugging you? I need you. I'm actually calling about something else. Nicholas grinned. Come on, tell me. What other reason? Do you want to get a job with me? It's already late. I just hired a new cleaning lady. If only as a janitor, but it's an inconvenience, dust, dirt, cigarette butts. And there are always vagrants hanging around. So I don't recommend it. You'd better turn your own steering wheel, said Nicholas. Lillian was a great effort to pull herself together and finally get to the heart of her question. Listen, Nicholas, I know it sounds strange, but you are in serious danger. You see, there's a woman who's about to take a job in your office. Well, she's up to no good, and she has an accomplice. I don't know who he is or how he's going to help her, but you have to be on your guard. Nicholas responded with a mocking exclamation. Are you jealous? Did you see me with the new cleaning lady? This is just the beginning. There will be flowers. Now I'm giving her a promotion, and then I'll drag such a beauty into the registry office. From surprise, Lillian was thrown into heat, and cold sweat broke out on her forehead. She wasn't beautiful, just an ordinary woman, riding with a man in the back of my car. What are you talking about? I don't think we're speaking the same language. Nicholas paused for a moment and said, Look, if that's all, I don't want to go on and on. You already know everything yourself. We have nothing in common. So go on, goodbye, and don't look out for me. Who I date, janitors or whatever, is my own business. You get on with your life. Find yourself some truck driver or something, and make love. That's it. Come on. Lillian never had time to answer, because Nicholas immediately interrupted the call. A tear slowly rolled down her cheek. What a fool you are, Nicholas. All right, my job is to warn you, and then do what you want, but don't tell me how you got into all this trouble. Strangely enough, the conversation with his ex-wife did not make a proper impression on Nicholas. The businessman rarely believed anyone, especially people whom he had offended in some way or another. In addition, Nicholas Clark did not discount the usual female jealousy, which sometimes manifested itself in the most unexpected forms. Meanwhile, Elizabeth was steadily climbing the career ladder. In 2 weeks, she'd gone from cleaning lady to sales intern. All the employees were convinced that Elizabeth had gotten her position because of her very close relationship with the director. But in fact, that was not the case at all. If the office workers knew how Elizabeth had succeeded, they would not believe it and would consider it a fairy tale worthy of cheap tabloid novels. But Elizabeth really made her way not through the bed, but with the help of another tool which awarded her nature. Few people knew that Elizabeth's family were fortune tellers. Not the kind of fortune tellers who went around the train stations offering fortune telling. No, this was on a whole other level. Her main weapon was her gaze, which she used to literally shine through a person like an X-ray. Rarely could anyone resist that gaze. Usually people immediately retreated, yielding to the assertive and attractive woman. It could not be called hypnosis, because Elizabeth never asked them to do anything illegal. And the power of her gaze was not powerful enough to control people like marionettes. But to make them more compliant or softer was easy. Elizabeth didn't waste her gift and preferred not to use it without a good reason. So and her accomplice Eric was of the same opinion. Unlike her, however, he had no such gift and could only rely on his own strength, while Elizabeth became the queen of the office. Eric changed into the clothes of a street hobo and began to discreetly observe the company, studying what was going on and making notes in his small pocket notebook. Of course, no one paid any attention to him, because everyone considered street hobos to be alienated and didn't want to waste time with them. However, this was to Eric's advantage. Soon he fixed Nicholas's license plates, studied his daily routine, and learned his home address. In fact, in their pairing with Elizabeth, he served as a cover. That is, he studied the behavior of the object of surveillance, pursuing some personal, unknown to anyone's purpose. But Nicholas finally lost his peace, which did not go unnoticed by his official passions. Being a sultry brunette, she could not understand what happened. Why did the suitor suddenly stop giving gifts, inviting to the movies or restaurants? If earlier Nicholas every month gave her a diamond ring or something similar, now she could only count on a wilted bouquet of flowers, which brought the courier from the delivery service. Determined to find out what was wrong, Sydney made inquiries at the office and almost immediately learned about the new employee who had won over everyone who had the misfortune to run into her. "All right, let's see what you're up to, pretty lady. And what are you up to?" "You're probably looking for a rich daddy," Sydney thought as she got ready for the office. As it happened, she'd never seen Elizabeth before and had no idea who she'd be facing. But when Sydney saw Nicholas's new lover for herself, she laughed. What's so special about her? Where's all that beauty in her? Well, yes, eyes, of course, big and expressive, but nothing else special. And how is it that she commands everyone here? Sydney thought ironically and walked over to her. Elizabeth was sitting at her desk at that moment, listening intently to the senior manager who was interning her for a future job. Sydney, grinning caustically, asked, "Well, dearie, are you joining us for a long time or just passing through?" Elizabeth raised an eyebrow in surprise and looked at Sydney expressively. But her charms had no effect on Nicholas's mistress. It happened quite often, for all people were different and had their own willpower. Sydney never considered herself weak. She was used to fighting for her happiness. Was it for nothing that she spent so much time to get Nicholas divorced from this Lillian? It was her, Sydney, who gave her lover the trick to fake the DNA test. That the court probably won't order a retrial, and this wiretap. Lillian's not likely to figure it out. Realizing that she couldn't get along with Nicholas's mistress, Elizabeth backed off. "I won't be with you long, Sydney. I'm planning to build a career with Nicholas. It's very important to me," the intern said with emphasized respect. The most surprising thing was that Elizabeth still cleaned the floors. But she did it when there was no one else in the office, so as not to compromise herself from Nicholas, who had appointed her a trainee. The businessman himself understood. Stubborn cleaner deliberately waits until he leaves the office to exclude the possibility of any kind of close communication and other interesting hints from his side. However, it only spurred Nicholas on. It was time to feel the excitement of the hunter and taste life in a new way. Elizabeth's showy submission had no effect. Sydney immediately realized that the sly beauty had decided to trick her around her finger, so that she would not interfere with their conquest of life in the office. So Sydney hesitated for a moment, and then said, "Listen, dearie, I think you should go wipe down the steps at the entrance. They're too dirty. And you can start your internship a little later. I don't think there's any objection." Elizabeth smiled understandingly and immediately went to fulfill the instructions of the boss's mistress. Sydney gave her a glance and then turned to the department head. "Okay, her intern should be terminated for now. She doesn't need to sit around. Who's going to mop the floors then? Let her work when there's less cleaning work to do." At that moment, Barbara was embarrassed to note that it was Nicholas's personal order. Sydney categorically batted the air with her palm. "And I said she won't be interning anymore. I think my word is good enough for you." Barbara nodded in agreement and did not take the unpleasant situation any further. Why quarrel with the boss's mistress when it was still unknown whose would take? It was possible Elizabeth would fail so badly at this point that she wouldn't be able to recover. Sydney's been Nicholas's favorite for months, and her odds are much better. And if the office was boiling noisy passions, then in the life of Lillian almost nothing has changed, except that she finally found peace of mind. Now she no longer cared about Nicholas's problems, because her ex-husband had been warned about them and had to decide how to proceed. Just like before, Lillian traveled on calls and sometimes even with Kayla. When there was no one to babysit her daughter, she took her with her, showing her around the city and interesting places. Sometimes Lillian would choose a route that would be interesting for the girl. For example, she could easily cut the road and drive through the center. But instead, she would come to the waterfront so that Kayla could admire the beautiful view of the river shimmering in the midday sun. Despite her friend Taylor's skepticism, there were no changes in Lillian's love life. No, one day she even tried to meet someone online. When she registered on a dating site and saw several candidates who came to the date with tattoo marks on their arms and alcoholic amber, she realized that she was not ready for this kind of dating. Lillian was also busy getting Kayla ready for school. Even while she drove, her mother was asking her various logic problems to answer, and she was learning to read store signs and everything in sight. On top of that, Kayla went to a tutor who diligently prepared her for the first grade so that the transition to school was not so painful and shocking. So once rushing to another call, Lillian noticed the very passenger who was having a conversation with her companion and her ex-husband Nicholas. It would seem that there was nothing surprising in this, if it were not for the appearance of this very stranger. The change in his appearance was so striking that Lillian could not help herself and even slowed down at the curb. She opened the door and called softly to the man. The man turned around and recognized Lillian. The thing was that the man had changed a lot in such a short time. Tattered clothes, worn-out sneakers that could fall apart at any moment, and the same tattered cap on his head. That's quite an image. "Look, I don't know your name, but maybe you need some help," Lillian began cautiously. The man looked visibly embarrassed, then said quietly, "Oh no, thank you. Don't mind me. I'm sorry, it's not at all what you think it is. I'm not a beggar. That's not what this is about." Lillian thought for a moment. Then, with a nod of her head, she motioned for the man to join her. "Sit down, please. I won't take up much of your time. The thing is, I heard a snippet of your conversation with your wife in the car the other day. Remember when I dropped you off at the hotel?" He didn't argue and immediately said, "Of course I remember. I recognized you immediately. My name is Eric. Eric Brown. Doesn't my last name mean anything to you?" Lillian shook her head. "No, it doesn't. Why should it?" He grinned. "Our father was a real shark in the business world. He taught a lot of people how to trade, helped a lot of people and put them on their feet. He took Nicholas Clark under his wing, too. Elizabeth and I weren't really in business then. She was into hiking. I was into racing and stuff. We're twins, brother and sister." "Really?" Lillian gasped. Eric nodded. "Yes, you see, we thought it would always be like this. Dad would protect, pay, cover the expenses. So well, and then Dad was gone. After the due date, we found out at the notary's office that our father's inheritance had gone not to anyone, but to Nicholas, who was our father's right-hand man. Elizabeth was abroad at the time and didn't know what had happened. And when she came back, she and I realized that we were left with no money at all. Nicholas had somehow forged the documents and sent the IRS after us. I even did 4 years in prison. Elizabeth waited patiently for me the whole time, She was afraid to confront Nicholas alone. It's a good thing he didn't know us by sight. You see, her sister was born with abilities that she believed were passed down from her grandmother. And recently, Elizabeth decided it was time for revenge. We changed our names, of course, so the bad guy wouldn't find us. And we came to town. Lillian listened to Eric's story and could not believe her ears. Was it really possible? And she really did not know her husband. And Nicholas, it turns out, earned his wealth by dishonest means. Deciding not to keep the truth from Eric, she said, "I'm sorry, of course. The thing is, Nicholas is my ex-husband. He deceived me too, left me with a child without money, and he went to his mistress." Eric smiled and looked sympathetically at Lillian. "I think it's only fair to tell you this at once. The fact is that I warned him, but Nicholas did not take my words seriously. I won't get in your way. Yes, I understand. He's a scoundrel. Don't worry, we won't hurt him. We'll do something along the lines of the scam he pulled on our father. No violence. Let him go to prison like me and think about who he is in this life." "So you're not a drifter?" Lillian asked with a smile. Eric grinned. No, of course not. It's all a sham. The makeup and the wig and all that. We just need to keep an eye on Nicholas, lest he expose us. Elizabeth is a master of her craft. Soon she'll gain access to his office and get to his safe. That's when he'll be punished, because businessmen like him are bound to have business irregularities." For some unknown reason, Lillian suddenly felt a great deal of anxiety. No, not for herself, of course, but for this couple, brother and sister, who decided to challenge her treacherous husband. As it turned out a little later, the premonition did not deceive Lillian. And this time it was Sydney who was to blame. Seeing Elizabeth as a rival, decided to strike back. To reveal her true nature, Sydney bought a set of hidden cameras and, unnoticed by her boyfriend, installed them around the office. Being of a similar mind, she realized that the sly girl was obviously hiding something else behind the kisses and gifts, and all that romantic tinsel. She had to wait about 3 days before something interesting appeared on the tape. Watching the video again, Sydney gasped in surprise and grabbed her head. The thing was that the tape showed how Elizabeth, taking advantage of Nicholas's absence under the guise of a cleaning lady, penetrated into his office. There, disguised as a hostess, she approached the massive safe and began to examine it, then took out of her pocket a piece of paper with a cipher written on it. Most likely, Nicholas had been careless to open the safe in front of Elizabeth, thinking that this beauty could be trusted. Soon the safe opened with a slight click, and Elizabeth began rummaging through the documents with a look of true connoisseurship that spoke of her high skill in business papers. Since the shooting was taking place in real time, Sydney didn't hesitate and immediately called Nicolai, asking him to come to the office with her. At first, the businessman was skeptical of the idea. "Well, why should I go there? I just came from there. Elizabeth is in my office." "So what?" "So we'll see how she cleans it. I think you'll see a lot of interesting things today," Sydney said with a smile and disconnected the phone. In about 10 minutes, she and Nicholas were already in the office, where Elizabeth was scrutinizing the contents of her boss's safe. Finding the cleaning lady doing such a delicate task, Nicholas turned pale and slammed his fist on the door jamb. "So this is what you do. I was a fool to take your word for it, and you made all eyes at me," all hints said. "And here it is." Elizabeth shuddered and pressed herself against the wall. "I'm sorry, Nicholas, but it's not what you think," she tried to justify herself. But Nicholas was already feeling like the master of the situation, as he had regained control of himself thanks to Sydney. Elizabeth thought frantically about what to do next. "What do you think it's time to call the police to deal with you and put you in jail for 5 years or more?" Nicholas said with a deliberate stride, intending to intimidate the cleaning lady even more. Sydney pulled him back. No, we don't need the police. After all, they can get to our papers. There's got to be something else we can do. I suggest we take her out of town and drop her off somewhere without money or papers. Let her go wherever she wants. Is that a good idea? Yeah, we should take her somewhere. 200 kilometers away, in the middle of nowhere, Nicholas said, obligingly, realizing what was waiting for her. Elizabeth turned pale and pressed her back against the wall. Nicholas smiled. All right, it's over. You'll never get a place in my firm. At that moment, the sirens of the police cars were heard from the street. Nicholas flinched and threw an anxious glance in Sydney's direction. Is that the police? Who called it? Sydney shook her head fearfully. It wasn't me. I'm not completely stupid yet. At that moment, Elizabeth suddenly moved away from the wall and laughed loudly. Well, did you get caught, lovebirds? How cleverly did I lure you here? You thought I was working alone. I have an assistant, my brother Eric Brown. Does that name and surname mean anything to you? Nicholas turned pale and grabbed his throat with his hand, trying to loosen the knot of the tie. And it does tell you something. Are you his children? I heard they were missing somewhere. Meanwhile, Elizabeth continued to pound on the frightened businessman. No, they're not missing. I'm actually Frank's daughter. Yes, the same one you left penniless, as well as your wife Lily. Isn't that right? You bastard, Sydney hissed. But Elizabeth paid no attention to her threats. Now, Nicholas, you will answer for everything. I caught you red-handed. And you naively thought I didn't know anything about kidnappings. Eric had been watching the office all this time and knew that Kekfi had been there recently. He talked to them and found out what was going on right away. You son of a bitch. I'll kill you with my own hands, Nicholas roared in impotent anger. At that moment, the door of the office opened, and the room was immediately filled with men in police uniforms. A few minutes later, the handcuffs clicked on Nicholas's wrists. This happened after the officer had examined the contents of the director's safe. And there was a lot to see there: false accounting, masterful real estate scams, and shareholder fraud. Elizabeth grinned and winked at her brother, who was dressed in hobo clothes. Only now Nicholas realized that he was the victim of the very heirs he had cheated, from whom he had once sneakily stolen his father's capital. Lily learned about all this from the television news broadcast the very next morning on local television. As she ate her breakfast, little Kayla looked at the television screen with interest. When her father suddenly appeared on it, Kayla shouted with joy. Mommy, look, it's Daddy. Lillian didn't believe it at first, but when she got closer, her amazement knew no bounds. Well, I've got him. The trial, she said, and wiped away an involuntary tear. As it turned out, Sister and Brother Brown deceived Nicholas and Sydney, who considered themselves masters of the situation and accustomed to mock people, felt themselves real kings. The investigation of the Nicholas Clark case went on apace, and soon he and Sydney were in the courtroom. Nicholas' mistress was looking at a suspended sentence, but he himself was waiting for a very severe punishment, with serving the entire time in one of the northern colonies of the country. To Lillian's surprise, justice affected not only the heirs of the late Frank, but also herself, when suddenly she was once again the owner of the house her husband had once taken from her. Smiling enigmatically, Eric handed her the keys to the house in her hands, and handed her a large sum of money in an envelope for the inconvenience. Looking at him, Lillian could not believe her eyes, thinking that all this was probably one big but very colorful dream, which was about to be interrupted, and the harsh reality would come. But no matter how much Lillian pinched her shoulder, reality was still reality, reflected in Eric's kind and affectionate eyes. In fact, she had no idea that the initiators of the return of her home were not her acquaintances, but that Herr Brown himself, who felt pity and sympathy for the unfortunate single mother raising a young daughter. Unnoticed by himself, Eric began to think about Lillian more and more often, and then one day dared to invite her to a restaurant. Naturally, it didn't look like a romantic meeting, because together with her mother came little Kayla, for whom this date turned into another joyful adventure. Lillian probably didn't even realize at that moment that this meeting would be the beginning of a new life. And it wasn't about changing jobs or getting her house back. It was about the fact that Eric had surrounded her with the kind of attention and love that Lillian couldn't have imagined in a life with a cheating husband. Elizabeth, Eric's sister, was sympathetic to her brother's choice and did not put up any obstacles in his way. Moreover, she supported the candidacy of Lillian because she was a masterful judge of people, especially with the help of her trademark look fortune teller. A few months later, the young people had a modest but tasteful wedding, exactly as Lillian had once wanted. Only the closest people were invited, of course, including Taylor and some of Lillian's co-workers from the cab service. And immediately after the wedding, she quit the company and together with Eric opened her own company. Transportation in it were engaged and experienced people on the cars of the latest models. It is said that the business quickly went uphill, and those who meet Lillian now almost no longer remember how she started and how she worked hard on an old yellow foreign car, which once gave a meeting with her future husband. Little Kayla went to school, where she did well and told her teachers that she was sure to have a brother or sister soon. But Lillian and Eric considered the girl's joy a little premature. After all, judging by the ultrasound results, Lillian is expecting twins, which means it is possible that in the future Kayla will have both a brother and a sister.
Anthony stopped paying due attention to his wife a long time ago. He looked more and more at other women and girls, allowing himself to sit with the men over beer. What can I say? The man was all like his grandfather and father, former immigrants from a distant village who lived in fishing and hunting. And even after moving to the city and marrying a city girl, Anthony did not give up his habits. This, of course, always infuriated Barbara. What can I do? She complained to her only friend and neighbor Sophie, an old teacher and Jewish woman, who it is unknown how she ended up in this city, and on what means she lived is unclear. But why do you think so? You are a smart, intelligent woman, a primary school teacher. And you say that. Don't I understand? It is you, Sophie, who have children and grandchildren who will stand up for you. On the other hand, who will stand up for me. Understand I'm an orphan, and thanks for that I was able to learn with my own head. And if Anthony chases me, then where should I go? To the old room? You're just afraid of difficulties. That's understandable. But then see for yourself. Anthony is a bore and an ignoramus. Ill-mannered, but on the other hand, they are all like that. Was it really possible that your late husband cheated? Barbara looked at her neighbor in surprise. I thought mine wasn't walking when I was carrying our first and second babies under my heart. I was walking. Just remember, Barbara, some walk wisely, while others, like yours, put it on display for everyone to see. Sophie, does everyone really know now that he has a mistress? The neighbor smiled sadly, looked at poor Barbara, and stroked her hand. Barbara, just come to terms with it, and think about how you can give birth to a baby. How long have you been together? In a few years. But it just doesn't work out. Yes, I haven't tried anything. I went to see doctors and sorcerers, but everything doesn't work out. The doctor says that the problem may be in the husband himself. Well, how do you find out? You can't ask him this directly. Knowing your husband's tough temper, I dare to assume that such a conversation will end in good hassle. Well, on the other hand, how to check? You really can't give him a mistress. If she got pregnant, that means the reason is you. At least on the other hand, he may leave for her if his mistress carries a child from him. And men are so unpredictable. No, Anthony won't leave. His father won't let him. Are you sure about this, Barbara? The woman nodded her head affirmatively, wiping away accumulated tears with a handkerchief. She had confidence in her father-in-law. It was he who found Barbara for his son, introduced him, and forced him to marry when he found out that they were dating, and even intended to live together. Then he threatened his son that, if he divorced Barbara, he would not see the inheritance of his own ears. And there was a considerable inheritance there, as the woman herself believed. Well, what if your mistress gets pregnant? What happens? He won't abandon his child, his dear one. He won't abandon him. He will pay child support. And then, if anything happens, he will arrange guardianship. He is such a... Especially if there is an heir, he will break anyone's head for him. And the mistress will not agree to blackmail. My hand is strong, and if anything happens, it can burn you. Yes, he's a tough guy. Okay, see for yourself, but by the way, I have a couple of friends here. They went to visit a knowledgeable grandmother. If anything, I ask her address. Thank you, Sophie, you will always listen to me and console me. Nothing, neighbor. What can you do? This is our lot. If you need anything, get back to me. The neighbor left, and Barbara sat for a long time at the kitchen table in the empty 3-room apartment that Anthony's parents gave them for their wedding. And I thought and thought and thought and thought and couldn't come up with anything worthwhile. She understood that her husband was walking, and there was strong evidence for this. What can I do? Is it true? Shouldn't we put fly-agarics in his borscht so that he doesn't go for a walk? But the woman did not know how far her relationship with the beauty went, who came to their city to work as an agronomist and part-time accountant at a large woodworking enterprise. It was there that her husband worked as a mechanic, and she worked as a primary school teacher. How good you are today. Look what I brought you. And Anthony handed the woman a luxurious necklace made of natural pearls of dark blue, almost black color. Oh, Anthony, where did you get such beauty from? And what will your wife say to all this? What will she say? Nothing. I bought the same one for her too. So there's nothing to be offended by. But if you don't love her, then why are you still with her? The woman cunningly tried to find out what was going on in his house. My grandfather is on Barbara's side, and he said that if I divorced, I would be disinherited. And there, believe me, there is something to fight for. Come on, you're agile and young. Arms and legs, like everything else, are there. You can earn money on the spot. And with a laugh, she grabbed him by the place of origin. Jadwiga didn't want to miss out on Anthony. What if the wife finds out about us? The accountant gently wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed his chin. Nothing will happen, he will cry, that's all. Anthony was sure that this would happen. Even if we come to your house together? Jadwiga specifically emphasized the word your home while observing the reaction. Yours. Jadwiga, what are you talking about? What are you trying to achieve? When we started dating, we discussed this point. Don't touch your wife, you and I live separately. And she waits for me at home and cooks soups for me. Well, at least invite me to dinner? Or didn't I even earn that? Anthony, with a dissatisfied look, threw her hands off his shoulders and pulled away. He was already starting to get tired of this conversation. Okay, that's it. I have to go. Lunch was almost over, and I still hadn't had lunch. At the mere mention of homemade soup, Anthony felt a queasy feeling in his stomach and an urgent growl in his stomach. His Barbara's soup was always rich and delicious. Even my mother had never cooked something so delicious. So that means you don't love me? Jadwiga wailed in her polish and turned theatrically to the window, covering her face with her hands. Don't cry. I'll be back soon. In the meantime, it's time to work. Anthony quickly left the accountant's office and met his father nose to nose on the threshold. Dad, what are you doing here? His surprise knew no bounds. Yes, I decided to check on you, son. Your mother went home with Barbara to visit you. And I'm here, and I see that you've found yourself a new mistress. The man nodded at the sign hanging on the door of the accountant's office, Jadwiga Volchek. He looked at his son reproachfully, trying not to give him a ringing slap in the face. After all, this is not how he and his mother raised him. Oh, not like that. Bruno, although he came from the outback and had considerable health and masculine strength, never cheated on his wife. Yes, in my youth I had no hobbies, but when I got married I completely swore off cheating. But the son apparently didn't follow suit. He doesn't want to settle down. What are you talking about, Dad? I found out about salaries and bonuses. Do you really think everything is the worst? Oh, there's no need to tell me fairy tales. You reek of women's perfume a kilometer away. He shook his finger at him. Bruno wanted to say that he would sign over all his property to Barbara, but he lost his tongue just in time. It was not worth it to set up a woman like this ahead of time. Otherwise, you never know what would hit his fool in the head. Dad, for Barbara, I'll rip out anyone's throat, and she's my wife before people and God. Okay, at least you understand this. Okay, let's go home. I asked the director for you. My mother and I have a conversation with you. Anthony nodded and obediently followed his father. And Jadwiga stood under the door and heard it all perfectly. No, she didn't eavesdrop. It was just that the men spoke so loudly, openly, that everything could be heard perfectly behind the flimsy door. What now? All I can do is enjoy his caresses. He will never leave her, and a stingy tear rolled down her pretty face. Yes, what can I say? The woman was simply catastrophically unlucky. She didn't find a husband in her homeland, couldn't start a relationship, and there were only potential candidates for lovers. And so that someone would take them and ask them to marry. They simply weren't there. All the men passed by. Sometimes they stayed in her life longer, sometimes just for the night. Others spoke about her beauty, others about a woman's intelligence. Well, what does it matter to her? No family, no child, nothing. Jadwiga increasingly began to think about not just marrying Anthony, but having a baby with him. She knew from her lover that they had no children, but this family apparently had amassed enormous wealth. And maybe it's true. Follow your grandmother's advice and give birth to a boy or girl. Let it be a joy. Grandma, but how can I give birth? I've already tried and can't get pregnant. Maybe you can tell me what. And your boyfriend, does he have children? Or maybe infertile? This is important, granddaughter. Yes, it seems like he and his wife have no children. But on the side he said that there was a boy and a girl. And she might be lying. He's not lying, said the grandmother, laying out the cards on the table and looking at Anthony's fate. You know, my girl, I'll tell you one thing, that you shouldn't be together. But if you are thinking of giving birth to him, give birth. The baby will be nice, and his destiny will be wonderful. Granny, are you sure about this? Jadwiga looked carefully at the old woman who was smoking a pipe and looked at her granddaughter with a smile. Don't doubt it, I definitely see it. And my cards don't lie. The heredity there is good, and his relatives are rich. If they like their grandson, consider that a well-fed life is guaranteed for you. Jadwiga thought for a minute and began to finger her ancient rosary, mentally calculating each option. But then the grandmother took her word. Don't doubt it, you'll get more than you do now. The main thing is to conceive this child on your Anthony's marital bed in his home. Grandma, well, this is already. Don't think about it, do as I say, and everything will be good for you. Now go, I need to rest. Come tomorrow, I'll give you the collection. Just add it to your little man's food, and that's it. Consider it done. Oh God, thought Jadwiga, sitting behind the wheel of her car and heading towards the city. And why did she manage to go to her grandmother in the village for advice? Well, what can she advise? Herbs, rituals. Yes, in our age of technology and numbers, even though the very thought of the family's wealth haunted her. Maybe it's really worth thinking about the grandmother's words and not giving up on her plan? The woman turned the key in the ignition and pressed the gas pedal. The car let out a loud animal roar and took off, leaving behind a cloud of dust. Barbara had been studying with her students since the very morning. The woman was happy when she gave all of herself to the children, and they pleased her not only with good grades but also with their attention and love. But even today, Barbara more and more often returned her thoughts to yesterday's event, the arrival of Anthony's parents. They arrived and brought a bunch of gifts and local delicacies, but it was Anthony's mother who started the conversation with her, which alarmed and impressed this woman. Yes, it's understandable, old people always wanted grandchildren, but she and her husband live for so long and nothing comes of it. This frightened her at first, then made her despondent. but now Barbara has simply resigned herself to it. They gave me an address here, and I strongly advise you to go to it. The woman handed her a piece of paper on which the address of one village was written in beautiful handwriting. Wow. Judging by the name, it is somewhere on the border with Romania or Poland. Barbara.
Yes. Did you understand everything correctly? This is the address of a healer. And by the way, she helped many of my friends. Because Barbara, my advice to you, if you want kids, go to her. If not, then I'm sorry. I tried to do the best, otherwise, God forbid, he will find a woman on the side and make her a child. And what's next?
Barbara was sitting on a chair, crumpling a napkin in her hand and nervously biting her lips. She understood perfectly well how right her mother-in-law was, and if no measures are taken, the husband may simply leave. But you are an educated woman. How can you believe in all these superstitions? These superstitions, as you say, my dear, have helped me more than once to return my husband to the family, to give birth to a son, and to do many other things with the help of the most ordinary herbs and words. Don't underestimate this power. And what do you have to lose? Nothing at all, Barbara thought to herself, wiped away her tears and looked carefully at the piece of paper. And I'll tell Anthony that you'll come to rest with me. So don't worry about my son. Barbara mentally nodded her head and agreed. In the evening, lying in bed, she returned to this conversation over and over again. Anthony did not come home, and since his parents arrived, he spends the night in the garage. To all the questions why, he answered sharply that he did not intend to listen to his parents' moral teachings, so he would simply live in the garage. It's good that at least I come home for dinner, and you cook your own signature soup. Barbara smiled and nodded her head to her husband, because she knew perfectly well that he simply adores her signature dish and cannot live without it. He even once jokingly said that if they separated, he would definitely come to her for dinner. Anthony, what makes you think that I will have a new husband? Do I need you and only you? Yes, that's me, by the way. This was at the very beginning of their relationship. But now the issue with the children has become so urgent that even her signature dish is not able to save the rapidly sinking marriage. Okay, maybe it's good, but the face is not at home. It will be possible to pay attention to his parents and calmly think about the words of his mother-in-law, in whose person she found an assistant. Yeah, what if he really took a mistress? And the garage is just a go-ahead. Barbara turned over on her side and then simply got out of bed and began to walk around the room. She was truly tormented by doubts, but what could she do? She was distracted from her sad thoughts by a quiet knock on the door. Barbara, aren't you sleeping? The mother-in-law's voice was quiet so as not to wake up her already sleeping husband. No, Mary, come in. I heard you spinning around from the next room. And now you are pacing the room. Are you still thinking about my words or whether Anthony has found someone else? Both. It's all somehow intertwined into a ball. And to be honest, I can't figure it out. Everything is going so smoothly with you and your husband. Hey, no, honey, now we've gotten used to each other. And in his youth, my Nicholas was very wayward and violent. Do you know what guys from the outback are like in this regard? Jealous and free at the same time. Do not, you know. Maybe even good. Anthony is ours, one might say almost urban. Not too rowdy. But according to your Nicholas, you wouldn't say that he is so violent. Oh, take my word for it. If you looked at the wrong person, you'll get a slap in the face. The dress was shorter than it was supposed to be. It could have been pulled by the hair. Not to mention wearing makeup to work, especially to the store. It even got to the point that one day he cut my hair. Imagine. Are you kidding? Barbara listened and couldn't believe it all. It was so. A friend invited me to her wedding, and Nicholas was in town then. Imagine someone told him that your wife not only came to the wedding in a new dress, but also braided her hair with ribbons. So he flew in like crazy, grabbed a sickle and cut off my braid with ribbons right at the back of my head. I then roared over my braid, and it was a noble one, as thick as my arm. I raised her from a very young age. I hope Anthony won't be like that. Don't worry about it. By the way, my grandmother also helped people, which is why she helped pacify my Nicholas's temper and give birth to Anthony. Don't look. I didn't immediately carry a little one under my heart, probably in the 5th year of marriage. And now I want to help you too. But why? Why do you need this? Then, for my Anthony, I want the best wife and daughter-in-law. and that's who you are. After all, you never know what kind of bitch would covet her husband as much as our wealth. Believe me, I've seen more than one of these. But this is so lyrics and romances. Now, don't think. Better put on your robe and let's go to the kitchen to drink tea. I brought one wonderful collection. It will help improve your sleep and calm your nerves. 2 women were sitting in the kitchen by candlelight and drinking tea. They chatted like old friends. And who would have thought that mother-in-law and daughter-in-law could get along so well? Nobody. The next day, early in the morning, Mary dialed her son and, in the tone of a gallant commander, clearly said, "Anthony, are you coming home for breakfast?" Apparently, the son said that he had already had breakfast. That's why she immediately posed the next question. "By the way, I need Barbara. And I'm temporarily taking her from your family nest. I hope not for long. Don't worry, son, you won't be left an orphan without food. I want to send the girl to a resort for a couple of days to relax." Well, with your commanding tone, how can anyone argue with you? Take it. And let Barbara rest as much as she wants. That's what we decided on. Well, Barbara, now you are free like a bird for a few days, or even a week. By the way, if necessary, I will help you apply for sick leave at work. Yes, in principle, it's not worth it. We have summer and holidays. True, first graders sometimes attend after-school classes, but due to the accumulated weekends and days off, I can find time during the week. But what will I tell her? I have never communicated with such people. Nothing. You just come to her, and then she will do everything herself. There are rumors about her that the old woman sees everything. Barbara took a sip of aromatic tea and looked carefully at her mother-in-law, trying to understand and accept everything she was saying. Don't worry, you'll find her right away. Within a few days, Barbara packed a small bag and called a taxi that took her to the station. Standing on the platform, she kept thinking, is she doing the right thing? Yes, maybe it's true, Mary. It's better to do it and regret it than not to do it and rack your brains over the missed chance. Yes, don't doubt it, you're doing everything right. The young voice of a handsome boy sounded right next to her ear, and Barbara jerked in surprise. Sorry if I scared you. Do you need help with things? Yes, I would be grateful. Are you in this carriage? Yes, 13th place. Wow, a damn dozen. But you are coming with us, dear lady, and our cheerful company will entertain you all the way, if you don't mind. Yes, of course, I don't mind. Give me your bag. And the guy helped her bring her things to her place and sat her down when the cheerful company of young guys began to take their places. Barbara looked carefully at the cheerful guys who were apparently going on a camping trip. You are probably going on a hike? Barbara carefully inserted her word into the conversation of the young people. Well, how can I say a hike? We fifth-year students are studying the culture of one fascinating region on the border of 3 cultures. And so we go to the village. We will collect local stories, ethnic groups, songs, as they say, the culture of the local indigenous population, and the 3 nationalities living in this region. Or rather, within the framework of one very interesting village for us. How amazing. This means that God Himself sent you to me. I am also going to this village. At that moment, the conductor looked into their compartment and sweetly asked if they needed a bed and whether they should serve tea. Yes, dear girl, said Barbara. Serve it. In the meantime, in return, I treated you to a pie from my grandmother. Oh, thank you. This will be for dinner. And by the way, as you understand it, you are traveling in compartments for everyone? We arrive in the morning, almost before dawn. Don't worry, I'll wake you up. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll bring bed linen and tea later. The conductor left, and the company continued to settle down in its places. Yes, God sent me these young people. It will be fun to ride. And if anything happens, they will show you what and where on the spot. But how to start an interrupted conversation, Barbara thought. But then the young man himself took the conversation in the right direction. What is your name? Here I am, Oleg. And you, as I understand it, are going with us to the same village. I am Barbara, as the Georgian queen, and apparently I am going with you. Affairs? Yes, there is one thing. I think you will also find it interesting. Wow. We are directly pursued by success all the way to this region, Oleg said confidently. And he sat down more comfortably, preparing to listen. Apparently you have something to tell us. Yes, they told me that there is in this village, somewhere even on its outskirts, an old woman who seems to be a healer, herbalist and witch all rolled into one. Young people, I just ask you not to laugh, but I need to get to her. Wow. It's as if God himself sent you to us. Can we go to her with you? It's true, we are interested in everything. But if you don't mind. Yes, I don't mind. On the contrary, the support of young people is important to me. I really hope you won't laugh at me. That like this. An older woman believes in all this nonsense. No, we won't laugh, the girl said and extended her hand in greeting. My name is Helga. Can you tell me what problem you are coming to her with, if it's not a secret? Barbara closed her eyes for a minute and wondered whether it was worth exposing her own grief and problems to people's rumors. But at that second it burst through her. What can I say? After all, each of us has had moments when we want to talk about everything to a stranger, to shift our problems at least for a minute. Yes, you understand, young people. Maybe I'm wrong myself. Maybe it just happened this way, but my husband and I haven't been able to have a child for a year now. They seem to be healthy, they underwent examinations, but nature does not give us a chance to become parents. Maybe the problem is me. After all, my husband has a child on his side. But that's what they say, and I'm barren. My mother-in-law treats me as if she were her own daughter, but not at all. I'm afraid that my husband will leave for someone else, and she will give birth to a child, and I will remain out of work. Yes, and I intuitively feel that he has a mistress. I don't know how serious it is. The company of young people listened and remained silent, because everyone understood her grief and sadness, and then Alex tried to somehow cheer everyone up. And here you will check how much the old woman is a master of her craft. But by the way, our curator, historian Pablo, spoke about an old woman living in this village. Maybe this is her. This will be great. Sure, the topic of my fortune-telling. And he cheerfully raised his hand, and his idea was immediately picked up by the girl Helga. Then the topic of ancient rituals for pregnancy is mine. This, by the way, is very interesting, and as far as I know, no one has written it yet. So my work will be unique and inimitable. There is nothing unique. After all, this is all well-forgotten old stuff, said a guy with a thin beard that made him look like a deacon from the local parish from the top shelf. Barbara listened to them and smiled. After all, how good it was to travel in the company of such young people, ready to help and support in the most unusual decision. It was fun to ride. Evening imperceptibly turned to night, and the company, slowly settling into place, began to prepare for bed. The only one who could not sleep was Barbara, who was lying and looking at the shelf. I thought about the old woman, about her relationship with her husband, and about what would happen next. And Anthony at these moments was hugging the other one with all his might, giving her caresses and kisses. The woman carefully pulled her lover away from her and looked into his eyes. Maybe we shouldn't rush and act like this thoughtlessly. Your parents are probably at home, and I'm not interested in tumbling on my marital bed. Jadwiga, but understand, my wife and I haven't slept together for a month. Yes, and I like you very much. He tried to kiss her, but she pulled away, and breaking away from his embrace, sat down at her desk. I don't think this is a good idea. Yes, and I need to work. Work. How to bring you gifts, you always had time. The same skins for your new mink coat, ring and all. How now? I'm free, you need to work. Amazing. Jadwiga realized that she had gone a little too far, immediately jumped up and walked up to Anthony, gently hugging his waist. She kissed him lightly on the chin, but didn't get angry. You see, I need to get used to the idea that you and I will be doing this in the place where you slept with your wife. Just give me time. Okay, I'll go. I still need to eat and work. But tomorrow I think you and I will come to visit me. He winked at her and left the office, quietly closing the door. Anthony walked down the corridor and whistled a light melody, and Jadwiga put her head on her hands folded on the table and sobbed silently. But the truth is, how could she stoop to just running after a married man like that, being led by him? But in her youth she was the first beauty for whom the most enviable gentleman remained. Now what? There is simply no trace left of the past. How to be? Maybe we should just pack our things and move to another city and get a new job. Although on the other hand, what will change from this? Well, even if she finds a new job there, what will that do for her? Absolutely nothing. After all, Anthony's place will be taken by another, the same. She wiped away her tears and opened the window, taking a few deep breaths. We need to calm down, otherwise the director will come in and she'll be sitting there, crying and ugly. What will she say about her eyes then? As for Anthony, it's worth going to visit him and doing as her grandmother told her. Then you can think about the future. But Jadwiga did not even suspect that the fast train from the outback was taking Barbara to her own grandmother. Well, Barbara, our station Oleg said when all 5 of them went out onto the platform early in the morning, when the sun had not yet risen, and the early fog covered the grass with a shroud. Now let's get your suitcase and think about what we should do. Come on, Oleg, I'll carry him myself, he's light. By the way, look, there is a horse harnessed to a cart. Maybe they will give us a ride to the village. Indeed, nearby stood a horse harnessed to a cart, where a man of unknown age was dozing. He always came to the station with his mare, because he knew very well that only this train would make a stop near their village. And many of the sufferers are looking for their famous grandmother Elsa, as everyone called her, and at her age she could still give odds to many young people. What kind of braid? As thick as your hand and up to your waist. One day he saw Elsa swimming late at night on their lake. Where even strong men don't go, they said that this lake has no bottom. Who wants to check whether this is true or not? And she splashed in the water, on which the shimmer of moonlight glittered. How can you not believe that she is a witch? Especially when this old woman comes out of the water, and her wet hair, like a veil down her back, drags along her waist. Bruno. He shook the reins, and his filly set off, heading as usual towards the people. Young good. By any chance did you come to visit our Elsa? Yes to her. And you probably wait for such petitioners and sufferers every time. No, my grandmother told me about you. And he burst into a very unpleasant laugh, which gave many goosebumps. But seriously, I'm here every morning, because they go to see our grandmother a lot, so that's how I earn extra money. Get into the cart, I'll take you in. If necessary, you can stay in my hut. I live alone, and the house is big. Thank you, Alex said and looked at his companions. You were sent to us by higher powers. But I don't know what higher powers are. But since we came, it was certainly out of great need. Come on, sit down. There's no need for you to be cold. We'll come to me, give you some tea, and then to our grandmother's. But she doesn't accept morning prayers before the end. And she lives in the village. And how far is it from you? Alex couldn't calm down and kept asking the man, and he answered very willingly. Well, how is it in the village? Rather, behind the village, go a couple of kilometers further inland to the forest lake. She lives on the edge of the forest and collects herbs there. Does she have any relatives? Barbara inserted her word, trying to keep up with the young people and not be branded a prude. Yes, I had a daughter, but she died of a cold. An only granddaughter, Jadwiga, remained, but she lives in the city and rarely visits her grandmother. The girl became arrogant that Elsa would give her her gift. But I think that's where it all ends. Jadwiga has no talent, or doesn't, or simply doesn't want to. And then let them decide among themselves. The places here were truly beautiful, such a nature untouched by man and technology. Apparently her mother-in-law was right. These are places of power, but soon they stopped in front of a fairly large house, where their driver directed his horse and jumped off the cart as usual. He extended his hand to Barbara and said, "Let me help you. My name is Bruno. What about you?" The man's eyes were so blue that such a color simply does not exist in nature. Barbara, the woman said, spellbound, and extended her hand. Bruno's palm turned out to be tender and strong at the same time, and with a slight movement the man helped her get off the cart, took her suitcase, and led her into his house. More precisely, it was not a simple village house, but a solid wood frame, which not everyone could afford. And, as the woman noted, almost all the houses in the village were made of logs. Yes, we have a fairly prosperous village, and all thanks to Elsa. The man's words sounded like an answer to Barbara's silent question. It's because of her that a lot of people come to us, and where there is demand, there will always be supply. It's right. And the nature in your village is beautiful. Well, go into the house and serve tea, as promised. You can have tea, or something stronger. and if necessary, a bathhouse can be organized. The man said in a quiet voice, smiled slyly, and looked at the woman with bright blue eyes. This look, voice, and touch made Barbara feel either sweaty or cold. She had never experienced anything like this with Anthony, who was the only man in her life. Lord, how embarrassing, the woman thought. To come to such a wilderness for help in order to save the family, and look at yourself. Barbara, look. Oleg's voice distracted her from such thoughts, and she looked in the direction where the guy was pointing. The sun was rising over the horizon. Barbara was truly delighted with what she saw, because she had almost never seen a sunrise like this, and what she saw amazed her. Bruno, it's so beautiful here that you can't even imagine. Probably for me. A villager cannot understand all this beauty. But I ask you to come into the house. Barbara entered the house and looked around. Is this really how people live in villages? Everything in the house was done with taste and skill. TV and refrigerator, microwave, massive table, and beautiful carved chairs. In general, this could be called a merchant's house, but not a cab driver's house. Yes, she should live here. Apparently, Bruno saw it all on her face and said directly, "If you want, you can stay here as long as you want." Bruno, thank you, of course, but you practically don't know me, and you never know what trouble I came here with. Yes, what a disaster. The man has your woman, but you cannot conceive a child. Do not argue. I see a lot too. But you, Barbara, decide your fate. The man shook his curly head and did not continue what he wanted to say. Bruno understood that silence is often golden. And Barbara smiled and thought for a minute maybe she really should leave her Anthony and start living here with this local handsome guy in this distant village and give birth to a bunch of little kids. God, how she wanted this to simply forget her past and come here. Bruno, thank you, but their conversation was interrupted by young people who had just managed to put things in the rooms allocated to them and went out into the hall. Alex looked carefully at Bruno and Barbara and immediately understood everything, but did not show it. Bruno, what about your famous tea? They say that you brew it with special herbs. This is what it is. But sit down. I'll put on the kettle and treat you to more honey than you've ever tasted in your life. When will it be possible to see Grandma? Don't worry, we won't miss it. In our village there is a small church, and then the church bell rang, which means the service is over. Then we can get ready. The woman nodded her head and sat down on a bench that stood under the icons, while Bruno and the young people set the table. After half an hour, such an aroma wafted through the room that you could lose your head from this sweet variety, and the smell of pies and honey made your stomach growl. Wow, what smells! What a treat for the eyes and belly, Helga said and reached for the pie. I'm so hungry that I'm ready to eat everything. Eat up, girl. You, as a future mother, will still need strength, Bruno said and looked at her carefully. Helga almost choked from these words, but casting a sideways glance at Bruno, did not say anything to him. Maybe this Bruno really knows that he won't even have to go to his grandmother. Barbara thought mentally. Good afternoon. Barbara crossed the threshold of a small house standing on the edge of the forest. Come on in. Don't stand in the doorway of my house. I'm glad to have guests. A stately and beautiful older woman, with a long braid, she looks like the heroine of old paintings, but certainly not like an old woman who brews another batch of potion and dries bats. As I understand it, you are coming to me about your husband. Yes, my name is Barbara, and my husband is Anthony. And I also came about the children. There is no way we can give birth to them. Yes, and you will not give birth to them from your own. He walks, and as long as she keeps him under her thumb, you will not live. Yes, and without her you would have separated. It's just a matter of time. Barbara was simply stunned by what she heard and almost fainted, leaning on the door frame. To avoid falling, she grabbed the door handle and closed her eyes for a second. Yes, I see that you didn't know about it, although you internally suspected it. So quickly sit down at the table. Here, have a drink. Barbara sat down on a bench and took a wooden mug with a drink from the witch's hands, drank it in one gulp, and, looking at it, said quietly, What am I supposed to do? What should I do? Waiting for a new husband. Although no, your destiny has already found you. Just wait a little and everything will be fine for you. And your own home, and children, and a good husband. Are you sure about that? Barbara still hoped that this was some kind of prank, and she would now get up Go home and everything would be fine with them. Wait, and your destiny will come. I wonder who is my betrothed. Barbara looked at the woman ironically, not knowing how to react to the words, believe them or take them as a joke. You don't believe me, but I'll tell you one thing: he will have blue eyes. Dark-haired. Yes, you yourself will recognize him among many. Such a prince on a white horse. And Elsa burst into cheerful laughter. Then she sat down next to Barbara and looked carefully into her eyes. Taking her hand in hers, the healer began to stroke it and whisper something in an incomprehensible language. The woman sat spellbound and looked at her carefully, not knowing how to react, and then she simply began to feel inclined to sleep, and my head involuntarily dropped into my hands. Sleep, my girl, sleep. You didn't come here from a good life, from your orphanhood, but I will take away all your troubles, and may you dream about your real destiny. And Elsa carefully laid her down on the bench, put a pillow under her head, and went out into the yard where a group of young people were sitting. She glanced at the eldest among them and waved her hand, beckoning him to her. I see you are the eldest here. So listen, Barbara is sleeping now. Don't worry, everything will be fine with her. What do you understand, students? Yes, we have folklore expeditions, and if possible, then maybe you can tell us local legends, songs, or signs. Yes, young people these days are not too interested in magic, and even my granddaughter over there refused the gift, and I was so hoping to pass on my knowledge to her. And what will happen to your gift now? Helga looked carefully at this still strong woman and bit her lip, afraid to ask too much. What will happen, my dear? And she looked at another as her successor. Is that allowed? I take it this is a man? You understand everything correctly, man. And although in our family it is customary to pass the gift from grandmother to granddaughter, but if God is not worthy of a girl or something else, the gift should be passed on to a man. Interesting. What if he had no talent for your knowledge? My dear guests, understand that each of us has magic, and sometimes it hides so deeply that it is simply difficult to awaken it. But it exists, believe me, believe me. They sat and talked about everything and nothing, and Barbara was sleeping, and most surprisingly, she dreamed of the same Bruno who brought them from the station. But in this dream, it was no longer a simple man in old jacket and sneakers, but a handsome middle-aged man looking at her intently. And next to him stood two beautiful blue-eyed children. Barbara shouted his name so loudly that everyone on the street heard her voice and jumped out and quickly rushed into the house. Barbara, are you okay? Helga was the first to run up to her and took her hand. Yes, it was probably a dream. And there was Bruno who brought us here, two children. He took them into the house. Our house. So I saw my betrothed, thought Elsa. Barbara herself did not understand why she was so angry at the words of this woman that her future husband would come to her in a dream. But she jumped up from the bench and quickly ran out into the street. The woman, not understanding what she was doing, quickly headed away from the Elsa house towards the village with the only desire to pick up her things and leave here for her usual little world. Barbara, wait, where are you going? Bruno's voice sounded so unexpectedly that the woman tripped out of the blue and fell to her knees with all her might, painfully breaking her knee. Bruno, who asked you to scare you like that? Now my knees are broken. Forgive me, for God's sake, let's go, I'll treat your wounds. I have a first aid kit at home. It's not far from here, a few houses away. Already at home, Bruno himself treated her wounds and carefully looked at her face. What did our seer tell you? Judging by the expression on your face, you didn't like it at all. Imagine I didn't like it. I went for advice, but the outcome was completely different. Well, this happens in our world. Elsa said that there would be another, and this one was different. You, Bruno, came to me in a dream with two small children. Now Bruno himself was taken aback by what he heard and almost dropped from his hands the can of milk that he had brought from his neighbor. Is this really her, his destiny, which he has been waiting for so long, and which Elsa herself spoke about? This is the turn of events. He put the jar on the table, took out a cup and poured milk into it. He handed it to the woman. Drink this milk. Don't want. They've already given me something to drink in the morning. And after that it turned out that you are my destiny. What will happen after this milk? And she nodded towards the table with her head. Nothing will happen, because the milk is fresh. But whatever you want, I'll drink. Having poured himself some milk, Bruno drank the cup in one gulp and, putting it on the table, sat down on the bench. It turned out strange. But if this is true, then this woman is his future wife, and he will have the children he so wanted. Barbara, what if you really are my destiny? And in your dream, did you really see our children? Bruno, do you understand how unrealistic and stupid this all is? We have only known each other for a couple of hours. We are seeing each other, one might say, for the first time. And you are talking about a family that may not exist. After all, I am married and I have a husband. Barbara, I'm sorry if I allowed myself more than I should, but I believe and I really want to have a family, children. And you are such a beautiful woman, I don't dare detain you any longer. At least you can always count on my hospitality. Thank you, Bruno, I understand you, but it all seems so unreal and mystical to me. How? It's like a fairy tale. Bruno looked at the woman with a smile and noted that she smiled back at him. And thank you for your hospitality. If you accept, I will come to visit you again. Clean, so relax. Come. I will always be glad to see you. That's what they decided on. And in the evening, Bruno was taking the whole company back to the station, where the fast train heading to the capital was supposed to stop for. 3 minutes. Bruno helped load things into Barbara's carriage and, looking at her, said quietly, "If you need my help, come. I will not betray you, and I have enough money I can provide for you." Bruno, thank you. I'll think about your proposal and, if necessary, I'll come. She stood at the window and waved her hand to him, and Bruno stood on the platform, and his heart sank with melancholy and sadness. That's how his love left, and he couldn't do anything. All we could do was wait and hope that the witch was right and Barbara would return. Barbara drove home, thinking about what the local healer told her. Barbara, did you get answers to your questions? Alex looked at the woman carefully. Don't even know. I had more questions than answers. What should we do with them? She shrugged and turned out the window. I began to look at the trees, stations, and houses flying past without finding an answer. Barbara thought and thought and thought and thought, and time passed inexorably, giving no hope for a better outcome. Anthony, hello. Here I am. Barbara tried to put a smile on her face, because according to legend, she returned from vacation and should have been fresh and rested. But the answer was silence in the apartment. Strange. At the station, she called Anthony and said she was on her way. To which the husband snapped, "Come, I'm home, yes." Anthony was at home, but not alone, but with Jadwiga. The woman finally came to his home and spent the night on her lover's marital bed. Tea. Now, Anthony, I'll probably go. Now your wife will arrive. I don't want her to see me. Now I will decide in this house. I'm tired of you and I constantly hiding, and I think we should talk frankly with my wife and amicably decide what and how. Are you sure? The mistress looked at him carefully and stroked his hair. Yes, I am sure. In the meantime, my wife is traveling. The couple was so carried away by each other that they simply did not hear the door open and Barbara enter the apartment. She called her husband, and without receiving an answer, followed the noise into her own bedroom. What opened before her eyes instantly threw the woman into shock, and she simply did not know what to say, what to do. Barbara stood and looked at all this obscenity and simply remained silent. But Jadwiga noticed her first and screamed. The woman pulled the blanket over herself, covering her naked body. Anthony, stop. She pushed him and pointed at the doorway with her eyes. Barbara, weren't you taught to knock? There was anger and indignation in his voice. After all, his own wife dared to stop him at a very interesting place to knock. Anthony, are you serious? You brought your mistress into our bedroom, and I have to knock on the door of my own apartment. Yes. In the meantime, please, my dear wife, prepare some food for us while we rest. From such words, Barbara was not only speechless, she fell into a kind of stupor. Stupor shackled her thoughts and will, and leaving her suitcase in the corridor, she obediently went to the kitchen. A mountain of unwashed dishes, leftover potatoes on the stove, dried soup, all this was waiting for her there. Anthony's voice sounded impudent, arrogant, and mocking. Imagine, my dear husband, I cooked soup. And she threw a pan of boiling water onto the bed, almost hitting Anthony and his mistress. "What is your crazy wife doing?" Jadwiga screamed and jumped out of bed naked, grabbed her clothes and began to dress feverishly. She should be sued. Look, I have a burn on my legs. Better yet, take her to a mental institution." Madhouse? Barbara could not believe her ears and the fact that her husband did not react in any way to his mistress's words. "I'll call the police now and they'll take you away from here." "Barbara, calm down and don't shout. We need to talk about how adults can decide, so to speak, everything amicably." "Amicably, my dear husband. They decide to dress and not jump out of bed. You don't have to worry. I don't need your excuses, explanations, and everything else." She threw the empty pan on the bed and went to her room. She began to collect things in her bag, throwing them away without folding them. Barbara grabbed documents, money, and the few jewelry that her husband had given her from the table, and throwing everything into a small backpack, ran out of the room. Barbara quickly headed towards the exit, but her path was blocked by Anthony, who had managed to put on trousers for decency. "Barbara, where are you going? What are you doing? Don't you see?" Jadwiga said with a malicious smile. "She simply leaves you, and you should just file for divorce." "Jadwiga, I didn't give you my word here. Let him clean for you, cook, iron your shirts, get along with your mother and father. Or have you forgotten what your parents told you when you married me?" Anthony would never forget these words. When they first submitted an application to the registry office, the father threatened, "This is your first and last marriage. Take care of your family. If you get divorced, all your property will be transferred to your daughter-in-law. And it doesn't matter for what reason they would divorce, there will be no children, or the wife won't please. My mother and I will always be on my daughter-in-law's side. Moreover, Barbara Sirota, and to offend such people is a sin. It's a sin, Father, to live with someone you don't love. But I won't leave Barbara." But now he remembered that conversation, and he had no choice but to bite his lips and think about what to do. Jadwiga jumped out of bed at such words and, like a fish, gasped for air. She simply did not expect such a turn of events. It was not easy for her to accept the fact that her legal wife so easily accepted the very fact of betrayal, but also that this person has every chance of ending up on the street, and in the status of a beggar and homeless man. And who needs it? Anthony tried with all his might to restrain his anger and not raise his hand against his wife, so as not to kill her. "Do you understand that it was a moment of weakness?"
So minute that you had enough time to get from work and here. Anthony, don't try to tell me stories now. You have been with this woman for quite a long time, and thank God that everything turned out this way.
"It happened. How is that?"
Jadwiga could not forgive anyone for disgracing her like that, and not even allowing her to get a word in.
"Jadwiga, you are a grown woman. You were simply used. You satisfied your own ego, and that's all. Or did you think that he would give up his wealth for you? Never. Has he ever given you a valuable gift?" "No, I didn't give it. Only a bouquet of lilies of the valley, and even then from our city flower bed." Jadwiga, of course, blatantly lied about everything, trying to downplay the importance of Anthony in her life, as well as the volume of financial investments in her. "You see, did you want to cheat him out of money?" Barbara stopped for a minute and mentally wondered if she had taken everything, if she had taken all the most valuable things. Barbara came out of the entrance and looked carefully. "Yeah, there's Anthony's car. The neighbors on the bench have been gossiping since the very morning the kids have been scurrying around in the sandbox." The woman put her backpack on the bench and thought for a minute. Where should she go? No, as a last resort, you can, of course, call your mother-in-law and ask to stay with her for the first time. Barbara didn't even know how and what to do next, because Anthony knows where she lives, or rather she lived before, and where she works. For the sake of money, he will pester her with his visits, ask for forgiveness, and try to return her. But no, I won't let you interfere in my life. What if you return to the village, to that same Bruno, to his log house, and stay there forever? Barbara thought to herself and sat down on the bench for a minute. But then the front door slammed and Anthony ran out into the street, all disheveled and angry. Apparently the showdown with Jadwiga was serious. Look, her husband's face is so red. The anger makes my eyes flash like lightning. He looked for Barbara, and when he noticed her on the bench, he exhaled with relief and approached, trying to speak as calmly as possible. "Barbara, I ask you, Let's talk quietly and calmly. Let's talk like adults and reasonable people. How's that? Do reasonable people really just drag all sorts of indecent things onto the marital bed? Well, you see, she tempted me. But I love you. Don't drive me away. It seems to me that you are more worried about your parental capital than about me, or where I was on how to resolve the issue with children. What would you do if she got pregnant? Would you live with 2 families? But this is a utopia. Your parents would not accept this state of affairs. And where would you do something? Oh, Anthony, tell me, please. Don't know. Anthony really didn't know what he would do next. After all, he never planned his life so far ahead. And now I will still stay with you. No, Anthony, I just don't need you. Sorry, but I'm leaving you.
Okay, now I have a question. And where do you intend to go?
He stood and looked at her with an angry, twisted face, cherishing the last hope that his wife would ask to go home. Believe me, my dear hubby, this question should not worry you in any way. Yeah, that means you have someone to go to. And you will tell me that I am cheating on you. Were you really planning on leaving for someone else? I don't have any lover, and you shouldn't attribute your own sins to me, and I can go, for example, live with your mother for a while, and then think about who I should be with. She turned around and, picking up her bag, walked towards the roadway, where on the side of the road she simply raised her hand and began to catch the car. But the woman did not want to upset Mary, and she will tell her all her adventures later. Now it's time to think and think about everything calmly. And where are we going, dear girl? The driver winked at her cheerfully and turned the ignition key in his old, but still working car with checkers on the door. Come on, she waved, so to speak, without looking at the train station. The driver nodded his head in understanding and rushed off, trying to drive carefully and avoid getting into holes and potholes so that the passenger with sad eyes, God forbid, would not get seasick. They drove for quite a long time, about 15 minutes, or even 20. Although, needless to say, it was the peak of the lunch break, and it was also Friday. Many residents of the metropolis tried at these moments to leave the stuffy city, but she wanted to see Bruno again. Sorry, did you say something? The driver looked carefully at this strange passenger, who was muttering something absurd under her breath. Did you tell me something? Oh no, sorry, I didn't say anything. Probably from an old habit. The taxi driver nodded understandingly and continued on his way. And Barbara continued to look out the window at the city landscapes flying by, and with every second her confidence grew more and more. Confidence that she should go to Bruno and come what may. And let me be considered a walker, but at least this is honest. And then I'll go to court. The taxi driver looked in the mirror at his passenger and did not say a word. You never know what kind of clients you come across. The main thing is that they get paid. And then it's no longer his business. Barbara paid the driver and, taking her bag, entered the old station building. She looked at the display of departing and arriving trains. Yeah, here's the direction she needs. Girl, give me a ticket for the evening train number 157. Yes, full. When the ticket was in her pocket, Barbara realized how hungry she was. Yeah, from one train to another. And I didn't even have time to change clothes, eat, or take a normal shower. That's why she wildly wanted to throw off her dusty clothes, stand under the stream of hot water and wash away all her sorrows. But in the evening, Barbara sat comfortably in her compartment and, taking out a mirror, carefully looked at her reflection. It's good that I at least washed my face in the toilet, otherwise I would have walked around looking tired and exhausted. It's such a pity that she didn't take Bruno's phone. After all, even if he doesn't want to accept her, he'll simply send her home. So what should she do then? Yes, do nothing. I'll just go back to my room and continue working. Although why on earth would she return to her little room? She legally has the right to part of the apartment, which his parents gave her and Anthony for their wedding. Therefore, to hell with dogs. Out of principle, I won't let you live comfortably with your mistress. And it's true. And this Jadwiga wanted not only to grab her husband with a hook, but also her property. What if she can get pregnant? Barbara tossed and turned in bed all night with such thoughts, but could not sleep a wink. Just before dawn, she went out into the vestibule and began to look out the window. Forest, fields, power lines, all this flashed before her eyes, like her own life, gray and joyless. And I really wanted normal human relationships, warmth and comfort. Girl, your station is next. The conductor handed her a ticket and smiled sweetly. So all my life on wheels. The carriage is her home, Barbara thought. But apparently everyone chooses their own destiny. It's nothing you can do. After 20 minutes, she was already standing on an empty platform far from her house and turning her head just like the first time. Everything around was shrouded in fog. It was so quiet that you could hear the dew dripping from the grass. Yes, neither Bruno nor his cart and mare were visible. Was she really so mistaken, and he simply didn't come? But he said that he's here every day. But as it turned out, he lied. Barbara stood and almost cried. But then in the distance she heard first quiet, and then more and more distinct clattering of hooves. And now the cart appeared. Has he really arrived? Didn't you lie? Barbara. Bruno immediately recognized her figure from afar and thought to himself with surprise that he had made a mistake. But no. What are you doing here? You just left. Bruno, is your proposal that you can stay in the village relevant? Barbara tried to squeeze out a smile, but it came out somehow crooked and askew. Yes, sure. I see you are alone here. There is no one else. Then get on the cart and let's go. The man helped her sit more comfortably on the cart and lightly spurred his mare. Now they were driving in silence, not saying a word. And what could we talk about? Bruno understood that Barbara had not come here again out of a good life and asked to stay with him. And the woman felt uncomfortable explaining something along the way. Barbara, can I ask a question? Why did I come here? You know, your healer was right. And my husband is not just walking around, but he also managed to bring his mistress into our house, put her on the bed, and asked me to make them some soup.
Yeah, thought Bruno, this woman has nothing good. Apparently, she really didn't come here out of good happiness, but that means Elsa was really right. This woman is his destiny. That's exactly what she said in the evening, when Barbara had already left. And he drank quietly alone in his own kitchen.
You're still standing there drunk, Bruno. Elsa's voice sounded right next to his ear, causing the man to tremble so much that he almost spilled the glass of tincture. Ugh, Elsa. You walk like a cat. At least cough at the threshold for decency. What if I'm with a woman? Yes, with what woman? Except with this little white one. And the healer nodded at the bottle of cloudy tincture that stood in the very center of the table. You shouldn't get drunk. Look, you'll still sleep through tomorrow morning. Well, tomorrow will be a normal morning, that's all. That's not all, said the old woman. I had a vision that Barbara would arrive tomorrow. So you should be at the station as usual. Understood me? I understand. I haven't drunk my brains out yet. But why would Barbara come back? She didn't believe a single word you said. Well, whether you believed it or not, it's none of your business. But she will most likely believe her own eyes when she comes home and sees her husband in bed with his mistress. Are you sure about this? And if she doesn't see it, then what? She didn't even look in my direction. And you say that she will come to me? Let's argue. If he comes, you will take me as godmother to your child. Yes, deal. If so, then I will carry you in my arms for this. He hugged the old woman, and she patted him on the back and spoke quietly. Better stop drinking and go to bed. Tomorrow will be a new day and a new life. True, from the very morning Bruno kept doubting whether he should go to the station or not. After all, the witch did not receive on Mondays and the people knew it. But now maybe it's not worth going. Looking at his reflection in the mirror, the man ran his hand over his stubble. No, I'll probably go. Now I'll go and shave and go now. All this flashed through his head in a matter of seconds. And Bruno, quietly nodding at the mare, glanced sideways at Barbara. She too was silent, mentally recalling how she found her husband in bed and that his mistress turned out to be a Polish woman. Bruno, do you believe Eliza? Do you believe what she says? Why not believe? Just recently I couldn't even imagine that you would come, but now you're here. He wanted to say that she herself asked to stay with him, but he bit his tongue just in time. And I myself asked to live with you. Is that what you wanted to say, Bruno? If you don't want me to live with you, then stop your horse. I'll go back. No, Barbara, you definitely won't leave here now. And if you are embarrassed by the fact that you will live with me as a guest, then I can tell you right away, marry me, and you will be a full-fledged mistress in my house. The woman looked sideways at Bruno and was just about to say something when her mobile phone rang. Looking at the screen, Barbara picked up the phone. Yes, Mary. Harry, Barbara, where are you? Bruno has been calling me since the morning. He says you're missing. No, you are neither at work nor in your room, in the dorm. And now I'm going for the second round to the village where the healer Elsa lives. For the second round. How can we understand what is actually happening? Were you there or not? Was. But I didn't really like what you told me the first time. Oh, how can I tell you, Mary Pavlovna, your son definitely has a mistress, and I want to divorce him. But where are you now? I'm going to the village, and I'm thinking of staying here for a while. Are you sure about this? My mother-in-law understood that nothing could be solved by shouting and swearing, so she tried to speak calmly. Yes, just don't get me wrong. It's hard for me to forgive betrayal. I need to think and make a decision with a calm mind. That's right, Barbara. But please call me. Do not get lost. Of course, I understand that my son is not perfect, but I would not want to lose a daughter-in-law like you. I heard you, and thank you for everything that you have done and are doing for me. Barbara hung up the phone and looked into the distance. The first rays of the morning sun illuminated the wheat field, and a light breeze made the ears look like a gentle sea. This is the truth, how fate can put everything in its place. The mother-in-law turned out to be closer to her husband and mother, and the stranger simply took him in and sheltered him in his house. Did she, mother-in-law, call?
Bruno looked at the woman carefully, trying not to show his excitement.
Yes, she said that Anthony was looking for me. She probably asked you to come back? Oddly enough, but no. After all, he understands I don't have the character to forgive betrayal like that. But you, Bruno, are still ready to host a married lady. Ready. But may I ask, how long will this sweet lady remain married? Not for long. Just believe me, we need to think about the situation a little now. And in a few days I'll just file for divorce. That's all. Bruno wanted to ask what about us, but he bit his tongue and turned his horse towards his house. He opened the gate and led the horse into the yard. Then he helped Barbara bring things into the house and, pointing to a cozy back room, said, "This is my daughter's room. You can stay here as long as you want." "Do you have a daughter?" Barbara looked at the man in surprise. "Yes, I had a woman when I was young, but it probably didn't work out. But I don't abandon my daughter, I help her. And if you want, I can introduce her." Bruno's words startled her. But the woman just smiled and answered, "Yes, we should probably get to know each other, but a little later. And to be honest, Bruno, I don't even know how to react to your proposal." "Which one exactly? To meet my daughter, or remain a full-fledged mistress in your house?" "He will only be glad of this." Elsa's words behind them made both of them flinch. "You are back after all, Barbara. So I was right. Yes, and you were right. I wanted to come to you later, but I got ahead of you." "Nothing. I always say what I see, and it always comes true. Anyway, on the occasion of your arrival, I brought you a cake. I baked it myself. Knew you'd be back, Barbara." Barbara looked carefully at a real masterpiece of culinary skill with pigtails, curls with 2 doves on top. Wow, just wedding. But we are not husband and wife yet. But you are a couple that fate brought together. And you shouldn't deny this. Bruno will make you feel good. But if in doubt, don't rush into a decision. Just wait and see, and your Anthony will show his true colors. And then you will finally make the right decision. Elsa turned around and went to the gate. And the man and woman stood at the porch of the house and, dumbfounded, looked after her. "Yes, Barbara, and if you want, then come to my place for tea tonight with Bruno." Barbara nodded her head silently and turned her gaze to Bruno, who also looked at her incomprehensibly. Anyway, which have not be avoided. By evening, Barbara had gotten a little comfortable in the house, laid out her simple belongings, and having prepared dinner, sat down on the veranda. "How do you like it, Barbara? In my house, if you need something, you always say, 'We won't buy it in our store.' This way you can go to the city. I have a car in my garage." "Do you have a car? What about the horse and cart? Why don't you drive a car? You see, this is a kind of production, an entourage or something, but nothing more. Believe me, Barbara, this is all the man gestured around the house and the farmstead with her predictions and help. You can be sure of this." Yes, I'll try. But Bruno, tell me, what did Elsa mean when she said that my husband would show his face?
But you can ask her this. It's time for us to get ready for a visit.
Here is the familiar little hut again. Grass is on the walls, sedge on the floor. Everything here breathed with a certain mystery, about which epics and fairy tales are written. It's so fairy tale-like here. Perhaps the only thing missing is a black cat.
But why is it not enough? I have one like this in my house. Apparently he just decided to go for a walk. Or, as always, he went out hunting for mice.
Wow. Elsa, can I ask a question? What did you mean when you said that my Anthony would show his true colors? But really, should I be afraid of physical harm from him? Or will Anthony, as always, limit himself to a verbal skirmish? Yes, you see, Barbara, your Anthony is not as simple as it might seem. But I won't tell you anything yet. You must see everything for yourself with your own eyes. But I hope he won't harm me. She really was scared. After all, you never know what you can expect from an angry husband. Don't worry, he won't cause any physical harm to you or anyone else. But you will see everything for yourself later. Barbara nodded her head, but the anxiety did not go away. The unknown scared her. But the woman's anxiety was also noticed by Bruno, who simply took her hand and, leaning towards her face, spoke quietly. Don't worry, Barbara. I'm also difficult and will always protect you. Do you understand me? His voice sounded different, not the same as always, but confident and tough. There was a sense of animal strength in him. This sent goosebumps down Barbara's arms, and looking at them, the woman noticed how the hairs stood on end. She simply nodded her head, mentally agreeing. But why lie to yourself? It was so nice when a man solves all your problems, when he takes responsibility for his own woman, home, and in general. But apparently Bruno's intonation somewhat frightened Barbara. And noticing the expression on her face, the man immediately spoke, quickly softening his intonation. Barbara, I'm sorry if I scared you, but I'm really not a mama's boy or some guy from the village. I have a higher education, 3 diplomas, and work in a hospital. As fate would have it, he even became a novice in a monastery. But now I live here. Wow. Wow. You, Bruno, have a biography. But Barbara still wanted to say something when at that moment she received a call. Yes, someone knows how to interrupt a conversation, the woman thought. But looking at the mobile screen, she sighed heavily. Well, yes, who else could call her? Faithful hubby Anthony, who apparently cooled down after a fit of rage and decided to dial it. Barbara, where are you? The once beloved husband asked without words of greeting. Anthony, why do you need this? Well, you have your polished girlfriend, so live with her. I will file for divorce myself. You don't have to worry. Yeah, there's really nothing to worry about. And will you also leave me the apartment, which, by the way, my parents bought? I'll leave it if the court agrees to give me a divorce. A minute of silence on the phone spoke eloquently. Anthony was calculating all the pros and cons, feverishly wondering what the catch was. Barbara, tell me the whole truth. What's the catch? You are giving me the apartment just like that, without trying to defend it for yourself. I'm not as mercantile as you. Come on, how pious you are. The woman heard her husband's heavy, angry breathing on the phone, and could not understand how until now she had not noticed all this, all his anger and greed and lust. God, how blind she was. And why are you silent? Or do you have nothing to say? Just imagine, there is something. Why do you think we haven't had children until now? I wonder why. You shouldn't answer though. My dear husband, it's all my fault. That's what you always said. No, all this time I gave you one special herbal decoction, and thanks to it you could not get pregnant. And why? I didn't need a wife like you. You were picked up on the street like a puppy, warmed up and given a successful marriage. But why do I need a wife without family and tribe? A beggar who could not give anything to me and my children. Is that all you wanted to tell me? Said Barbara, surprised that she had not yet fainted from what she heard. Yes, Anthony shouted into the phone. Barbara simply pressed the end button, not wanting to continue this conversation any further. She leaned her head against the warm wood of the house and closed her eyes. Lord, what an idiot and a brute she lived with all these years. And she firmly believed that he loved her, that everything would be fine with them. Did your husband call? Bruno looked at her carefully and nervously fingered a black rosary with a cross hanging on it in his hand. Yes, he threatened, and you are right, and Elsa. He gave me a very, very unpleasant surprise. So to speak, he opened his eyes and showed his own black insides. Elsa smiled and, raising an eyebrow, looked at the woman, as if asking, and what did he tell you there? Barbara sat with her eyes closed and didn't know whether to tell them or not everything that Anthony had told her. But all this put such pressure on her from within that she simply did not have the strength to remain silent. Elsa, you can't imagine how hard my soul is right now. I just don't know how to live with this anymore. Tell me, maybe I can help you with advice. And I, if necessary, with my fists and a gun. Bruno sat closer to Barbara and took her hand in his. But the woman didn't even notice it. You see, all this time while my husband and I lived, he slipped some herbs into my food or drink. I don't know where, and I couldn't get pregnant. And all this time, my husband bullied me and reproached me for being infertile, for not being able to consider myself a full-fledged woman and mother. A tear quietly rolled down her cheek, but only Elsa noticed her, who sat down next to her and quietly stroked her hand. Nothing, Barbara, believe me, every poison has its own antidote. Me and Bruno will help you feel good again. Do you think I can have children? What are you saying? And you don't need to understand me. With these words I conjure fear and sadness. But Bruno will bring water from my stream and we will drink tea. And then everything will be fine with you. By the way, let's go to the forest today. Can you help me find a fern flower? Today is the night when your deepest desires can come true. An hour later, the company went to the local lake, where almost the entire village had actually gathered. Wow, Barbara thought, looking around. There were tents with benches and tables around the lake. A variety of foods were cooked over an open fire, and there were trays and refrigerators with drinks and sweets. There was no crowd of young people. Don't be surprised. We have ethnotourism at the highest level, and my experience and knowledge help the villagers get on their feet, earn an honest living, and show guests a different side of village life, and ancient wisdom. Honestly, I couldn't even think. Barbara, we also have swings installed on the field. Let's go for a ride. Swing? Doom. The woman's surprise knew no bounds. Yes, these type of boats on high poles. Believe me, it's very exciting. He grabbed her hand and pulled her into the field, where indeed a high swing had already been installed, and people were crowding around it to take a ride with the breeze. Barbara and Bruno rode on boats, laughed like children, enjoying the wind in their hair, the night sky, and the fact that they could surrender to the holiday like this and not think about anything. And Barbara rejoiced like a child, not at all reproaching herself for being able to rejoice and enjoy freedom. I feel as good today as I have never felt in my life. And I'm not even the least bit ashamed of my actions, because I left my husband. I'm not even angry at him for his words, but for what he did. Because why? Bruno looked at her carefully and gently pulled her towards him, putting his arm around her shoulders. Because I'm finally free. Bruno leaned over and gently kissed her mulled wine-sweet lips, lightly and unobtrusively, trying not to frighten off such a moment of trust. The man was afraid that Barbara would push him away. But either nature or herbs or wine made her more pliable to her desires, which she always suppressed in herself, forcing her to respond to his kiss with a passionate and demanding kiss. Barbara, of course, I'm glad that you allowed me to kiss you. But let's not rush. And this is what a man tells me. It's strange, usually it's the partner who has to say it. But no, don't think anything like that. You are a beautiful woman. I like you very much. But I don't want you to regret your momentary weakness later. Barbara pulled away from Bruno but did not let go of his hand, but turned around and pulled him towards the lake. Then maybe we can go make wreaths and float them on the water. Let's go. They wove wreaths, threw them into the water, picked flowers and rejoiced at the night, like children lying on the grass and counting the stars in the sky. Good morning, Barbara. Bruno lay leaning on his hand and looked at her with a smile. Bruno, I hope you and I didn't sleep yesterday. I wanted to ask Barbara, but I didn't dare ask such a frank question. Weren't we asleep? No. You don't have to worry about this. We were by the river, weaving wreaths, counting the stars in the sky. You leaned on my shoulder and just fell asleep. Why didn't I bring you home? Well, because you asked me to take you here. Here is the answer to your question. How did we end up here? Yeah, I don't know, Bruno, what came over me yesterday. Probably your tea or local mulled wine. But I admit, it was the best day of my life. But Bruno, there is no need to spoil such a wonderful morning. Let's put this aside for a while. Then come on, get up. I'll prepare you a real rural breakfast at home. Oh, that already sounds great. Bruno helped his unexpected night companion get up and led her home again. They walked along a field path, smoothly turning into a rural road, and chatted about nothing. And Barbara more and more often caught herself thinking that she felt wildly, to the point of pain in her heart. She always wanted to walk like this, talk, and not think about anything. Barbara, what are you thinking about now? Bruno looked carefully into her face, hidden under the flowers of yesterday's flower. Yes, you just shine from the inside. Is it true? Yes, you know, Bruno, I want to tremble in my knees and just walk like that and not think about anything. Then I propose to meet the dawn in the field every morning. How do you like this idea? Unless, of course, you sleep until noon. No, and I don't sleep until noon. That's why I like the idea itself. And it's true. What can I say? Fate itself brought these two together. It was brought together in the most mysterious way when, a month after they met, Barbara and Bruno soon got married, and the local priest married them in an ancient wooden church, where many people from the village and surrounding towns came. This was the first wedding in this temple. And the clergyman himself said then, by combining this couple in a legal marriage, we launch into our hearts not only love, but also the piety of our Lord, love each other, be fruitful, and live happily ever after. Oddly enough, Barbara's ex-mother-in-law came to their wedding and was sincerely happy for her former daughter-in-law. She even asked Barbara for forgiveness when she was leaving and asked to come visit them. Things didn't work out for her son with Jadwiga. Anthony then took her to the station for the last time and asked, "Did you even love me?" Well, how can I tell you? Anthony probably loved her in her own way. But you yourself understand that you have nothing, because your parents gave all their property to Barbara. Why do I need this? If we had children, where would we live? In my apartment? Sorry, Anthony, but you can't build a family on such conditions. So the girl cheerfully kissed him goodbye on the cheek and jumped into her carriage, waving to him from the steps. Yeah, what a fool you were, Anthony. You lost everything you had, your wife who loved you, the opportunity to have children and a home, and his parents abandoned him. They simply stopped communicating and answering phone calls. But one fine evening this happened. Anthony, hi, this is Barbara. If you still remember. Anthony made me sweat and get goosebumps all over my body. Of course he remembered her and could not forget her. No matter how hard I tried, I immersed myself in my work. Drinking and partying, nothing helped. Hello, Barbara. Of course I remember hearing from my mother that you got married. Well, your free life didn't last long? Yes, not for long. That's not why I'm calling. Barbara thought for a minute whether she should have said this or not, but she still said, I want to thank you so much for bringing Jadwiga to our house, and I witnessed it. Otherwise, I would not have returned to this village, would not have decided to have a relationship with Bruno, and would not have gotten pregnant. Yes, Anthony, I am carrying twins under my heart, so thank you very much. From what he heard, Anthony's cheekbones twisted. They played with anger, but the man could not say anything in response. All this could have been his, but it never happened, and all due to my own stupidity. Is that all you wanted to tell me? Yes. Although no, I signed over the apartment that your parents registered in my name. So you can live in peace and build new relationships and tell her thank you very much. You can gloat. Jadwiga left me after a few days. Now I'm free like a bird. But when I meet her, I will definitely say your regards. Thank you, Anthony, and all the best to you. Barbara hung up, and Anthony just held the phone in his hand for a few more minutes and listened to the short beeps, not knowing how to react. No way. Barbara is happy. She has a new husband and 2 children, and he was left without a home and family. Even his relatives abandoned him, and he himself is to blame for this, because there is no one else to blame. But Bruno himself had a different opinion. Barbara, maybe you shouldn't have called him and told him all this. He gently hugged her shoulders, approaching her from behind. Bruno, you know, I've wanted to say this to his face for so long that I probably wouldn't be able to restrain myself. And as Elsa says, It's better to regret what you did than what you didn't do. As if your ex-hubby wouldn't do any harm. But you are with me. Barbara looked at her husband in bewilderment. With you. But Barbara, just understand, you can't always cause harm just by deeds. You can use an unkind word or a conspiracy. But that's it, you definitely got this from Elsa. Or maybe she has it too. But tomorrow I'll still go to her and let her give you a talisman. Which, I don't want your ex-husband to have any influence on you. He kissed his wife tenderly, stroked her rounded belly, and put his ear to it. Barbara, the children are already knocking their feet, asking to be brought into the world as soon as possible. And it's definitely a boy. By the way, what did we decide with the names? The woman smiled and looked at her husband. This issue has been on their agenda for a long time. And if they decided on the name for the girl Mary, in honor of the former mother-in-law, then they did not decide on the name for the boy. Let's ask Elsa. She will be our godmother, so let her give the boy a name herself. Barbara nodded her head in agreement with her husband and kissed him tenderly on the cheek. And really, is it worth arguing with the man you love when everything can be resolved with the help of a wonderful godmother? They stood on the shore of the lake and watched how the sun set in the field, how the winter sun hid behind the rare branches of still bare trees. Barbara was happy that now she had a person next to her who would not just say, "I'm with you," but also protect her, lend her shoulder, and protect her from problems. And may everything be fine for everyone, even Anthony.
From the window of the hospital room, I could see the chimneys of the factory, which had been raining for a week. It was gloomy and damp, so even walking around the small green courtyard was no fun. Jason felt like he was slowly dying, and, admittedly, he had reason to think so. He'd been rich and happy until a few months ago. Life had seemed so wonderful, any dream, traveling, buying expensive things without thinking about the price. But all that wasn't enough when illness came into his life. Continuing research, the doctor divorced his hands at every question of his wealthy patient Jason Vipri. Endless procedures, tests, visits to specialists. Jason was so tired of it all. Given that it wasn't producing any results, his strength was diminishing. He was having unbearable headaches, and he had to fight insomnia with sedatives. He was fading from day to day. At first, his only joy was his wife. He waited for her arrival every day, got out of bed and looked out the window, as long as he had the strength to stand. Of course, he was well cared for, ready to come at the first call, and the ward was more like a room in an expensive hotel. But still, there is nothing more precious than loved ones. It was only when he was sick that Jason realized that his wife was the only one who could visit him, not because of money, connections, or business, but because she cared about him. But for some reason, she came less and less often, and the meetings grew shorter, more silent. Annie would sit by his bedside for about 20 minutes, as if it were a heavy duty rather than the desire of a loving wife, and then she would leave on some pretext. "Paul says I need brain surgery, but the outcome is 50-50, Jason sadly shared in one of their brief encounters. "Oh well, we have to try. After all, Paul isn't just any doctor, he's been in the clinic for 15 years, Annie said affirmatively, looking out the window and thinking about something of her own. "I'm afraid of dying," her husband was quite candid. "Jason, what are you making up?" she asked irritably. But then she came to her senses and said more softly and cheerfully, "It's going to be okay, you'll see," touching his arm. Annie got up and started to leave. "What, you already?" Jason asked. "But I just got here, didn't I?" "Stay a little longer, I've got to go," she replied. "I'll come back the other day and stay with you a little longer." The door shut behind her, and outside the window the sun, which had been illuminating the room with golden sunset light all this time, disappeared over the horizon. Twilight was thickening. He felt so sad that Jason cried for the first time in his adult life. He was overcome with fear of dying of illness and the loneliness of those he considered his friends. They had only come once to negotiate the sale of his share of the company. His parents were long gone, and Jennifer had suddenly grown cold to him. But even that coldness wasn't as frightening as her smiles and the satisfied smirks she sometimes allowed herself, forgetting herself. There seemed to be some other life outside this room, some happy place where they were happy. And Jennifer came here as a matter of duty. It would have hurt Jason even more if he'd seen her exhale with relief when she was on the porch of the clinic, waiting hopefully for the car to meet her. All that kept her near her husband these weeks was the huge inheritance she was preparing to receive after his death. It had gotten quite dark, and in the gloom only the red lights of the medical machines and the television could be seen. They could hear people talking in the hallway, and the beams from the headlights of passing cars could be seen on the walls. But Jason was alone, wondering what he had done wrong in his life to die at 32. There was a knock at the door. Then a small female figure appeared in the doorway. An orderly entered the room and brought in her cleaning tools. "It's time to go for a walk," she smiled. "Can I stay here?" "I'm not bothering you," Jason said cheerfully. He'd grown fond of these short visits in the last few days, when the older nurse, Darcy Peterson, had gone on sick leave and the positive, red-haired Kathy had taken her place. "All right," she agreed. "I'll make it quick. You can stay a little longer. I'm all alone in here." "Oh, come on, you have so many business people coming to you. Not one patient is not so popular with us. It's all business." Katie's been quick to mop the floor. "Take out your flowers. Turn on the TV. That'll make it more fun. And soon Paul Alexandrovich will come to see you," the girl said contentedly. "I'm standing at the door with a mop in my hands." "You're good, Kathy. Come in and she'll be cheerful at once." "How do you do it?" "I just find something good in everything." She smiled and closed the door carefully behind her. Perhaps no one but Katie had ever been so sincere and straightforward with him, and that made it feel better, if only for a little while, especially since the doctors kept shrugging their shoulders and ordering more tests. And Annie didn't come once a week, and once a week looked into the room, and without taking off her coat, inquired about her husband's health. Not that she listened much to his stories, but he still shared his worries with her. He'd long ago realized that his wife had lost all interest in him, and was talking only out of a sense of duty, or even, that was what Jason was afraid of, pushing the bad thoughts away. Well, his Annie can't be with him only because of the inheritance, not to love him, but hoping he'll get the money soon. Waiting for him to know. That thought he could not endure. Fortunately, his heavy musings were interrupted by Katie's whirlwind, who burst into the room like a fresh breeze on a sweltering day. She was holding a paper bag from the local bakery, and the appetizing aroma of freshly baked goods boded well for Jason. A couple of fresh buns and a sandwich. He'd rarely been able to eat anything really good lately. The hospital food, though prepared for him with care, was far from homemade. "Thank you, Katie," he said sincerely as she helped him up. "Eat up and get well," she winked and placed the table of food on the patient's lap. It was amazing how much of an appetite he suddenly had. Jason thought for a moment that he was sure to get better and get back to business. "Did you go to see him again?" Nurse Irene asked with a chuckle when Katie entered the office. "What's the big deal? And you still don't take any money from him?" "No. What do I need his money for? I'm not doing anything. I'm just being supportive." "Don't worry, you're a lover." "I wouldn't advise it. It's better not to run into his wife." "Sure," incredulously stretched the woman. "Why do you say that?" Katie was indignant. "I'm not going anywhere." Irene had hinted at extra fees for almost all the wealthy patients at their clinic. Jason was no exception. Maybe that was why she found it hard to believe in Katie's sincerity. That same evening, his wife visited him. An expensive black car was waiting for her at the entrance, and she was dressed smartly, as if she were going to a restaurant or the theater. "How are you?" she asked impatiently, going over her gloves in her hands. "You know, not bad," Jason replied in a weak but cheerful voice. "Played a game of chess with one man today. He's in the next room over and he's going crazy with idleness too." "Good," she nodded her head. "I've been meaning to ask you. Anyway, I've run out of money in my account. I need to buy a couple things right away. Can you call the bank okay after that?" Jason, you couldn't tell anything from his facial expression, but his heart dropped. He called his assistant, and after arranging everything, he looked at her. All set. "Can you go?" "Thank you, darling," she replied and left. Left alone, Jason felt the terrible headache again. At his moans, a nurse came running in, followed by Paul seeing a dose of painkillers, They watched him for a few more minutes and left, leaving him alone with his gloomy thoughts. "Kathy, I have a favor to ask of you," Jason addressed the nurse during the morning cleanup. "Excuse me, dear." A smile lit up the girl's face, but the next moment it was immediately gone. "I'm going to die soon and I just can't help but think about my funeral." No, don't say anything, please. My wife and co-workers will do everything hastily. Or maybe they won't do it at all, Jason Dimitri. What on earth are you talking about? Katie couldn't take it anymore. What death? What funeral? You're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. You're a very good, kind girl. Kathy, I've never met anyone like you in my life. But still, I beg you, go to the funeral home, book, and make the arrangements. Pick out the casket, the wreaths, the clothes. But what else is required there? He spoke so earnestly that good-natured Kathy could not refuse. Paul had ordered her to leave work early for the afternoon, and her friend Irene was already talking about it. There she goes again, with all her favors and all her secrets, she told the other nurses. You'll see we'll have a scandal on the ward over this. Jennifer's not going to be happy. Going to the funeral home was awkward and scary. Katie had never had to choose such items before. She decided she wouldn't take the responsibility, but would take some catalog and let Jason decide on the casket and burial clothes if he wanted to. She walked to the closest bureau to the hospital, stepped around a parked black car, and opened the door with trembling hands. The first thing that caught her eye were the numerous wreaths of artificial branches and flowers hanging on the walls. After running her eyes over them, she looked in surprise at the man and woman talking to the counselor. Annie was standing near the counter. Next to her, a tall young man, dressed smartly in a dark blue jacket, perfectly ironed pants, and leather boots. His companion was not far behind. She wore an elegant black dress, a coat, high-heeled shoes, and a shining necklace around her neck. Their faces expressed sorrow and sadness. Katie stepped closer. Yes, let's stop there with the roses. The woman pointed her finger at the picture. We'll write to my beloved husband on the ribbons. At this point, Annie pulled a handkerchief out of her pocket and held it to her eyes. Was she actually crying or wiping away dry eyes? Katie didn't figure it out. Seeing her like that, shocked, she immediately turned around and walked out, circling the brazenly parked car again. She headed home, taking advantage of the unexpected free time she had. They were having a merchandise update right now. They asked her to come back in a week. She lied to Jason all the previous evening. Katie wondered if she should tell him about the funeral home meeting. After all, it was unlikely she had another husband who had passed away unexpectedly. It was more likely that she'd chosen a wreath for Jason with that regretful look on her face. What is this? The wife has already buried her husband in absentia, but the tongue did not turn to tell such a person who lost the will to live. Not only are his loved ones not visiting him, they're preparing to bury him. Annie showed up a couple days later. As always, beautifully dressed in a cloud of exquisite perfume. She walked past Katie without even noticing, or even giving the rich man an attentive glance. What on earth was she up to? Jason spoke a little worriedly at first, but solemnly, as if he had prepared for this speech in advance. I have an idea, and I think you'll like it. What idea? He asked without enthusiasm, turning his face toward the window and looking at the treetops that retain their golden foliage. The doctors can do nothing. How many treatments have we had? I've lost count. Treatment, no results. So I thought maybe you could go to the country for a while, live in nature, get away from these hospital walls. I'll think about it. Jason turned and looked hopefully at his wife, expecting to see sympathy on her face, but there was none. She smiled coldly, rising from her chair. You don't love me anymore. What nonsense is this? Of course I do, she said with a poorly concealed effort. I'm just tired, Jason, I'm tired. I have to deal with all your clients, your investors, your employees. It's exhausting. A week later, Jason was discharged at their request, and his wife took him to the village where a house had been bought for him. As he watched the trees and fields outside the window, he kept replaying the words he had heard in his head. During his last days at the clinic, Jason Dimitri had told him in a conspiratorial tone. Irene, stopping by for 5 minutes, apparently to give this information. I heard such a thing today. What is it? He turned grudgingly, preoccupied with his own fate. Jason was planning to agree to the surgery the doctor had insisted on. I overheard your doctors talking today. They agreed not to tell you, of course, but that's cheating. What are you, after all? Jason was angry. You don't have more than 2 weeks to live, Irene poked him resentfully and walked away. That news hit him the hardest. He dismissed all thoughts of the surgery, almost stopped eating, stopped caring for himself. Calling his wife, Jason asked her to come and informed her of his decision to move into the country house, adding to himself, "But even those. Jason, why are you doing this? Do you need treatment?" Katie was worried when she heard the news of the patient's imminent discharge. "There's no need for treatment, Kathy," he answered. "I'll be dead soon." "What makes you think that?" Stay, the nurse urged. Finally, she decided to make one last argument. "Do you know why I came back with nothing? When you sent me to the funeral parlor, because I met your wife and a man there, and they were choosing a wreath for you." "Well, they're absolutely right." "It's about time," Jason said indifferently. "What could I do with him?" Kathy asked him to take her number so he could call her if he needed help. After he left, Katie couldn't find a place to be. "Oh, calm down," Irene told her. When was the last job she didn't have time to clean, and in half the offices assigned to her? Who is he to you to worry so much? There's something wrong with this story, you know? I can't just take it and not think about it. You've got no business of your own. Go to work. Those rich people will sort it out for themselves, Irene said. She's a noble one, isn't she? She doesn't want any money. She's worried sick. I don't understand you. Kathy was upset. She suddenly felt very uncomfortable being around her coworker. And about the money, you took something from them. But you did, Irene replied proudly. It's a sin not to take from someone like that. What's going on in their family? It's none of my business. And you stay out of it, you'll be the least of it. What did you take them for? Katie asked without her former friendly tone. Oh, that's a very funny story, Irene laughed. His wife must have been playing a trick on him and asked me to casually say, You've only got 2 weeks left. You should have seen the look on his face. Are you out of your mind? Katie boiled up, glaring angrily at her former friend. She walked out and slammed the door behind her. How she wished she had asked Jason for his phone number. For 2 weeks she hadn't known where he'd been taken, what was happening to him, or if he was even alive. In the meantime, Jason was settling into his new home. It was an old house with simple furnishings, but cozy and bright. She promised to come every other day, to hire a nurse and a groundskeeper. She disappeared almost immediately, so I had to do it myself. Strangely enough, Jason did feel better. The silence, the coolness of autumn, the vast vistas outside the window, the scent of apples and honey, all of it transported him back to his childhood, to his grandmother's little house where he'd spent his summer vacations. On the other hand, a heavy, painful desire to say goodbye to everything was growing inside. Without wanting to, he did not want to die, especially alone, abandoned by everyone and needed by no one. It was not easy to get up and move. But that was half the trouble. The house was full of unpleasant surprises that could be found anywhere. On the first day, Jason walked into the kitchen and fell into the basement with 1 foot, miraculously not breaking anything. When he got up, he examined the broken piece of flooring and noticed that it had been purposely filed down, repairing the floor. Jason started cooking. He turned on the stove, put a pot on it, and went to lie down to build up his strength for the soup. He couldn't rest, though, because soon a strange odor of burning meat wafted from the kitchen. The portable tank had suddenly sprung a leak. That's the last thing we need. I'll have to buy an electric stove, Jason said to himself, and then he grinned. Just when I'm about to die, there's a stove. When he entered the bedroom in the evening, the master sensed something slowly and silently moving on the carpet beside the bed. He came closer to examine the strange creature, but immediately recoiled in fear. On the floor, twisted in a ring, lay a brown snake with a red fanciful pattern. Where would a viper come from in the house? This circumstance absolutely threw him off his guard. The time was late, he was alone, and he knew no one in the village. He didn't know what other traps these rooms held. Overcoming his fear, Jason opened the window, took the heavy cotton blankets left by the previous owners, and threw them at the snake. The snake fell silent, giving him the opportunity to grab it and throw it outside. The rustling of leaves between the trees in the garden made a movement from the window into the thicket. The uninvited guests disappeared into the darkness. Jason lay awake until morning, listening to every rustle. The next day he tossed and turned between wanting to call a cab to town and not wanting to do anything about it. The feeling of hopelessness and lack of energy only made itself felt in the evening, spent from a sick sleep. He was able to get up, wash his face, and organize some sort of dinner for himself. There was no more energy for anything else. He lay down on the couch. Suddenly the ceiling shrieked. From above came sounds like quick, small footsteps. Another night of no sleep, Jason asked aloud. He got to his feet, threw his jacket over his shoulders, and went to find out what wonders the attic had in store for him. However, it was impossible to do so. As he climbed the few wooden steps up, the whole structure collapsed. Jason fell with it, and now he was lying on the dusty floor, not knowing what to grab onto. His head ached from the impact. His leg burned with fire. It was only half an hour later, when the pain subsided, that he was able to crawl to the door and sneak inside. Realizing he couldn't do it alone, Jason dialed his wife's number. Then he dialed several friends, but ironically they were all either unavailable or answered with a series of long beeps. Lying on the floor, Jason stared at the ceiling, wondering how he'd gotten to this point. Scenes of their lavish wedding, to which about 100 guests had been invited, their vacation at the seashore, the purchase of a car, conferences, and business meetings appeared before his eyes. He felt success and good fortune dissolving into thin air as the brilliant future he had planned lost its shape. Who is he now? What does he live for? There was one more number in the phone book that he wanted to call, but something prevented him from doing so. The sun was already out of the window, and dusk was settling in when Jason made up his mind. "Katie, hello. You recognize me, of course. How are you?" "I've been so worried about you." She sounded so warm that he sighed. How nice it would be to see her again right now in this very house. Then all the problems would go to the back of his mind. "It's okay. I'm living it up, getting high. It's nice and quiet here," he began cheerfully, "except that I fell down the stairs and hurt my leg trying to call someone, and I can't get up." "So it's not a fracture?" Katie was worried. "I don't think so, but it hurts to get up. I'll come over." Is that okay? I'd really appreciate it." "Don't apologize. It's my pleasure." The room seemed brighter and cozier after those words. Tomorrow he wouldn't be alone. Tomorrow a girl with shiny red hair and an infectious smile would appear here, break the agonizing silence, dispel the painful atmosphere and the fear of death. Paul Alexander was angry for some reason when Kathy asked him for one of her 4 days off. "There's no one to work, and you give a day's notice. That's not how things are done, Catherine." "But I really have to. I do have someone I need to help." "I understand that, but I can't replace you. I have an important patient coming in tomorrow. Everything has to be perfect, so go to work." "Paul Alexander, I've been working 2 years without vacation or time off. Can Darcy Peterson take my place?" "No vacations at home, no vacations, and some people don't even get a day off. Darcy Peterson can't leave because, again, a solid patient is coming in. I need a young, beautiful staff in the meantime. So a very good person has to suffer because of the whims of your rich patient." Katie couldn't take it anymore. She had never let herself talk to her boss like that before, even though she knew about all his machinations and had been regularly supplied with that knowledge until recently. "Something wrong. Write a statement." "Calculating accounting indifferently," replied Paul, hoping, apparently, that the threat would have a quick effect. "Okay," Katie calmly replied. She was so angry that she actually packed her things and went to write her resignation letter. Having worked honestly at the clinic for so many years, she had never expected to be treated like this. "I'll find something better. I have experience." Yes, they would take her to any other institution, she explained to her colleagues. Gathered in the corridor, just sitting on the bus on the way to the village, Katie reprimanded herself for this act. It would take time to find a job, and what would she live on if she lost her only source of income? On the other hand, it felt like a relief. It was like a heavy weight had been lifted off her shoulders. This job, without vacations and sick days, had been wearing her down for a long time. Paul's words were the last straw. A familiar village flew past, and Katie pressed herself against the window to catch a glimpse of the White House behind the trees. Almost at the very edge of the street, it was where she'd spent her childhood. Her heart ached at the memory. She wanted badly for the bus to slow down near the dilapidated red brick bus stop. The doors opened and my mother came in with a full basket of mushrooms and birch branches, from which she would deftly assemble large bath brooms. The family lived poorly, and it was from this very poverty that Katie had gone to the city and entered medical school. But now she would give anything to sit with her mother once more at the table in their small kitchen, drink mint tea, sleep on the stove, and lie down longer in the morning. Listening to the wood crackle on the stove, nostalgic Katie didn't notice when she reached the village where Jason lived. It wasn't hard to find his house. She stepped inside and found him lying on the couch, covered by a thin blanket. The man was dozing on the couch. The room was a mess. The blanket was lying on the floor. There was a plate of food and a mug of tea under the bed. Katie felt sorry for Jason. The whole place was a testament to the fact that he had been sent here to live out his life, forgotten by everyone. Desperate, he didn't look like himself at this minute. "Hello, Katie," Jason cheered, waking up. "Hello, how are you here?" As you can see, he looked around the room with his gaze, although I still feel better here than I did in the hospital by evening. The house, as well as its sole occupant, began to look noticeably better. There were tablecloths on the tables, curtains on the windows, and the kitchen smelled of baked potatoes and vegetables. Jason cheered up. "I miss a proper home-cooked meal," he asked twice for more, leaving him to rest. Katie went in search of the store. Fortunately, it didn't take long to find it. There were people crowded in front of the little blue house with the grocery sign. They all gave the newcomer an attentive stare, obviously trying to understand who she was and who she had come to see. "Oh, what a beautiful girl. Do we have someone's granddaughter?" the clerk asked, pulling out cereal, butter, bread, and other items on the list. "Katie, I'm here to see Jason Dimitri. He lives on the outskirts. Maybe you know him." "You wouldn't know. A new guy doesn't get to know anybody. He doesn't go out too much." "Is it hard for him to go out? Does he get sick?" "Well, yes," nodded a large man at the counter, the chairman of the local cooperative. "So sick that his wife has already prepared a place for him in the cemetery." "What? How could that be?" Katie was surprised. "That's it. We are, as they say, shocked ourselves. Maybe you're confused. Look for yourself. They dug up her grave there. They called someone from the city." From the sales clerk's face, you could understand that this topic causes superstitious fear in the village. That's why few people dared to stop by Jason's house to meet their new neighbor. But how could they? Can it? The man is alive, and they've almost buried him. Maybe all this weirdness isn't an accident. Katie stayed with him for a week, during which time she got to know the villagers. Next door to Jason's cottage lived Granny, small, quiet, and pleasant to talk to. Katie found comfort in talking to her. She reminded her of her grandmother. It was she who had suggested Jason's unconventional treatment. "If medicine can't help, maybe we should try folk remedies," she said, pouring tea. "What do you mean?" Katie wondered. "There's a healer in the neighboring village. I haven't been there myself. I've heard that people even come to her from the city for help." Jason laughed at the idea, and Katie was eager to try it. "It's not like we're losing anything," she urged. "Let's just test it. Was she really helping, or was it all just talk?" 2 days later, they were on an old, cramped bus that traveled between villages twice a day. They had 3 hours to find the mysterious healer. Otherwise, they wouldn't make it home in time. Wandering the streets and asking locals, Jason and Katie finally reached her. The woman in the place did stand in the distance and greeted her guests unfriendly with tiny dark windows and a drooping wicket. Katie felt uneasy. She was beginning to regret the decision to come here. Jason treated it with the same irony, smiling and joking. It was hard to walk, though, and he was tempted to lie down. There was a light in the window, and footsteps were heard. The door opened, and a woman of about 50, short, in a brown long dress and a light shawl, from under which her black hair was poking out, came out. She spoke quietly, slowly, as if thinking over every word. When she learned the purpose of the visit, she invited the guests into the house. The wooden floor creaked with every step. Light fell from a large window. There were many potted flowers on the windowsill, and a cat sleeping peacefully on the ropes stretched from one wall to another. Collected brooms of herbs were drying. It smelled of chamomile and wormwood. Katie shuddered as something big, sad, and shaggy came out from behind the stove. It sighed and snorted. "Don't be afraid, that's my dog Baron. He is quite old now. He won't bite," said the landlady. The dog Baron lazily looked at the people who came into the house and made a muffled sound resembling barking, spreading his paws wide and walked towards the exit. Once he was outside, the owner invited Jason and Katie to sit down. Just like that, no one knows what it could be. The only thing that saves us is painkillers. Catherine finished her story. Without knowing the backstory, you'd think that Annie, Jason's wife, was so worried about him. "Well, can I try?" Barbara spoke up after some silence. "We'll probably go," Jason smiled. "The bus is coming soon. We have to get there in time." Kathy looked at him pleadingly, as if begging him to stay at least another minute. "I don't believe in eviction." The landlady addressed him. "I must admit, the whole thing seemed strange to me," Jason replied. "Jason, come on. Please," Katie begged. "All right," he surrendered, unable to withstand her hopeful look. "Barbara, any money I'll pay. As long as you treat all right," she agreed. "I don't need the money. But there is one request. I'll tell you when you're well." "Deal," Jason replied without hesitation. He was sure he wouldn't have to fulfill the request. The guests stayed the night in Barbara's small hut. Early in the morning, Katie awoke. She peeked out from under the blanket and saw her hostess preparing some kind of potion. There was already a fire burning in the stove. On the stove, something large from a pot exuded the smell of food. The girl closed her eyes and imagined the same old cottage of her grandmother, which always smelled appetizingly of baked goods, dried mushrooms, and raspberry jam. Strangely enough, Barbara was not at all embarrassed by the arrival of the guests. On the contrary, she had persuaded them to move in temporarily because their house was closed for a while. Her yard was bustling with life, with goats scurrying about. A couple of goats from somewhere deep within the buildings. A large black and white cow made a lingering sound that was new to Jason. This kind of environment was new to him. Everything surprised and amused him. He was still alert, but he still had headaches and a terrible weakness that forced him to lie down day and night.
Katie, on the contrary, felt like a fish in water in the village house. She was an excellent housekeeper, skilled in animal handling, milking the cow and stoking the stove. It was getting colder and colder outside. Snow was falling, foreshadowing the imminent winter. A month passed unnoticed by everyone. Barbara showed up with her potions, which she continued to make good-natured fun of, giving Jason a cool compress when he was in a lot of pain.
And she made him take up hardening. He only really approved of the latter and went outside every morning to douse himself with warm water, gradually lowering the temperature. "I'll be able to swim in the ice hole by winter," he reported, clearing the yard with a shovel. When Kathy returned from the village with her shopping, she stood beside him and looked at him in surprise. "What are you doing?" she asked confusedly. In the time they'd spent together, all three of them had switched to you. "Shoveling snow." "What did you think?" Jason smiled. "Snow," she repeated, as if not understanding the meaning of what he said. "How are you feeling?" "Fine, but it wouldn't hurt to lie down." That was only the first bell. He was indeed getting better every day. And after 2 months, Jason could walk to the store on his own, carrying water and firewood. And on New Year's Day, he cleared out the big tree in the yard, which soon glowed with colorful balls. Katie was childishly excited about New Year's Eve, determined not to think about the future, at least during this vacation. In January, it was decided to return. Katie went to check on the house, putting the place in hasty order. She headed for the exit, but at the door she ran into Annie, who apparently wasn't the first time she'd come, trying to track down her husband. "Who are you?" she asked sharply, squeamishly looking Katie over from head to toe. It didn't matter. Not wanting to talk, she locked the door and walked past. "Where's Jason?" Annie asked, puzzled. Katie turned around at that moment and looked angrily at the diamond-clad rich man in the mink coat.
"You'd probably want him to be in the other world, wouldn't you?" she exclaimed, What kind of nonsense is that? It's nonsense to order wreaths and dig a grave for a living person. I promise you. You won't get what you want. Jason will be alive and well.
With those words, Katie turned and walked away. She was seething with resentment, and not even the cold winter wind could cool the fire. Annie remained standing, not knowing how to react. The whole business had already been formally taken over by her, and in fact it no longer belonged to him, but was run by her lover. Waiting for recovery was going to get in the way of the ambitious couple, and something had to be done about it. Katie returned and told Jason what had happened, but Jason, inspired by the miraculous rescue, didn't want to fight or revenge. Let her do what she wants, he said. God is her judge. I don't care about that now. I need to save my health and start a new life. Feeling energized, Jason set about renovating the house. In addition to his business accounts, he had some savings for a rainy day. His wife didn't know about them, so cashing them out was no problem. Katie planned to get a job on the farm, but in the meantime she was helping him settle in. Now, after his recovery, Jason could confess his feelings to her without fear of condemning her to a lifetime of caring for a hopeless patient. She was happy, and of course reciprocated. Once he had taken care of the household chores, he suggested that Kathy visit Barbara and see what she wanted to ask in exchange for his help. I've been looking forward to it, she said as she set the tea on the table. I can't do it alone. Maybe you can. Barbara's daughter had gone to the city in search of a better life, to earn money, if she was lucky, to get married. There were no other options for her in the country but the farm, and that was not a fate she was happy with. After changing several places, Annie found a job with good pay and conditions. Some wealthy man was looking for a maid. Of course, a girl from the backwoods was happy with all this decent money, huge, beautiful houses. Then the employer began to show her signs of attention. I told her, give it up, come home. We'll live together. Maybe you'll meet a good, hard-working man, sadly told the witch doctor. But it was as if she didn't even hear. She just said, be happy for me. We're happy. And then suddenly she disappeared. A month or two later, I pelted her with letters. She doesn't say a word. When I got there, I realized everything at once. I could already see her belly. Barbara's daughter was pregnant with twins. The boys were born healthy. But the youngest mom had a hemorrhage. They fought for her life for days. It was the worst day of my life, Barbara cried. I still can't believe she's gone, and I can't see the boys. Where are they now? Who are they with? Jason asked. Their father took them to his house, but he let me see them. Even brought them here a few times. They're about 10 now. They're big, the loving grandmother said with pride in her voice. Now he's in jail for something. And my boys are with my stepmother, but she doesn't need them at all. She only needs money, that's all. Jason promised to help. He called up some old friends to get the addresses. 2 weeks later, they sent him all the information and he was on his way to New York for the first time since he'd moved to the village. The apartment where the boys and their stepmother lived was in a new high-rise. Climbing to the 11th floor, Jason rang the doorbell and was opened by a tall, slender brunette. What do you want? She asked in a rough, unpleasant voice, and he smelled cigarettes. I'm looking for Inna Vitalievna, I said. She looked him over and found him attractive. Are you here? And flapped her unnaturally long eyelashes. At that moment, 2 blonde heads looked out of the room and looked at the guest with curiosity. Inna turned around and snarled angrily. Well, go away, stick out. Learn your lessons. I just came to see them, Jason explained calmly.
To see them? The stepmother's face changed.
What do you want? I want to know why you won't let them see their grandmother. That's crazy money it took. So tell her she won't get a penny. Now get out of here. Wait a minute. I'm not waiting for anything. Go away, or I'll scream and call the police. The last thing Jason saw were 2 hopeful eyes staring at him from behind the door. On his way home, he decided to do whatever it took to help the boys get back to their grandmother's house. They would be much better off there than with that woman, and if housing was an issue, he would buy them a house in the village or the nearest town. Jason found a lawyer and he began to prepare the documents for filing with the court. Now all they had to do was wait until everything was ready. He and Kathy settled down, made repairs, updated the furniture, and thought about opening a small company. And in the spring, a very happy event came to their home. Kathy is pregnant. No sooner had the happy couple rejoiced at this event, as Annie appeared on the threshold of the house, like storm clouds on a warm summer day. She didn't look as smug as usual. "I really need your help," she said. Quietly, Jason led her outside. "I thought I'd already done everything for you," he said, smiling slightly. "Isn't there more to it? You couldn't steal my money?" "Jason, I'm sorry. Life has punished me for everything. All right, tell me what happened, and then we'll go." Alex was taken hostage. "Do you understand?" she cried. "Alex who? Who took him hostage?" "Explain. I don't understand." "Their business problems started a month ago, but the current managers, Alexander and part-timer Lover, to the last convinced everyone that nothing terrible would happen. They decided to open a food market next to the existing one, and the competitors did not keep waiting. The owners started receiving threats. Annie got a phone call that morning. She told the story in bits and pieces, interrupted by sobs. Alex had been kidnapped and demanded a ransom equal to the value of the business she had fraudulently inherited from her ex-husband. "Are you sure about that, Alex?" Jason asked. "Don't be jealous," Annie asked. "I love him more than life. I won't let anything happen to him." "No, let's go to the police."
Annie jumped up, grabbed her bag, and started for the door. Her face was red with anger and fear.
"I came to you for help, not for you to talk me out of it." She never showed her face at Katie's again. Jason settled into his quiet life. The house shone clean. There was a small vegetable garden and fruit orchards, and a nice fence around the property. A new gate had been installed, and all the villagers passed by and admired it. Jason seriously considered opening a company, bought the place from the collapsed collective farm, hired employees to rebuild the cowshed and clear the area of garbage. Kathy decided to take veterinary courses and planned to get a lot done before giving birth. Everything was going well, but there was one thing that wouldn't budge. Barbara was still waiting for her grandchildren to come home, and her stepmother wasn't planning to give them up so easily. The lawyer had filed a petition with the court, then prepared appeals, gathered a mountain of documents, but the decision had gotten bogged down somewhere in the paperwork to make it stick. Jason found out where the twins' father was serving time and went there himself. It wasn't without difficulty that he managed to arrange a meeting. The man was seriously ill, lying in the hospital wing. The prisoner seemed to be a broken man, but retained the remnants of his former beauty. He took a breath after descending the stairs and scrutinized the visitor, trying to understand what business he might have come for. "That's it," the prisoner exhaled after Jason's story. "I'm all in favor of the boys living with their grandmother. You can be sure they didn't give up. I've arranged for them to get money every month, so she's getting her lips done with it." He said it without offense, but with irony. Jason was reminded of Ina's artificial appearance and her swagger. "Aren't you hoping to get out of here early?" "No, I've already got lung cancer," he said, and then added sadly, "Life is coming to an end. I left money for the boys. They each have their own account. They'll get it after 18, and Barbara Alexievna will get it too. You give me the amount, I'll tell you where it is. They can't live in a hut in the middle of the woods." With the father's written permission to take the children, it was much easier. And in a couple of weeks after this trip, they were already running along the dusty country road to their grandmother's new house. By this time, she had baked pies and walked from window to window, waiting for her favorite granddaughters. After living with a hateful stepmother, the boys were happy to be near their own person. Barbara loved them with all of her heart. She was kind and allowed them all the joys of village life: to pitch a tent in the garden, to lie on the roof and look at the stars, to go fishing early in the morning, to sleep on a bed with Irene on the veranda. She also took Jason's word that they wouldn't leave the twins if anything happened to her. "I'm not an old woman. It's scary if my grandchildren end up with strangers again," she told the couple. And they agreed without question, even though they argued, saying, "Don't think about bad things before you think." How did she give them to you? Katie wondered after they got back from town. Hardly, Jason answered. She was so hysterical. It scared me, not to mention the kids. She said she was going to destroy me. And was it really about the money? Now everyone wanted to forget about the past and start over, and there were plenty of reasons to do so. Katie was expecting a baby. The first calves had arrived on the farm, and there were plenty of people wanting to work. There'd been no jobs in the village for a long time. An opportunity came along, but the past stubbornly persisted, reminding her of herself again and again. One fine morning, Annie Zadorazny appeared on the doorstep with a bag in her hands. It was hard to recognize her. No fancy clothes, heels, jewelry, and makeup, only bags under her eyes. From the bag on her shoulders and the sad look in her eyes, Jason could easily guess that she'd given the business to those very thugs. But where was her beloved Alex? "What's wrong with you?" he asked, stepping out into the yard. "Jason, I came to see you," Annie replied. "Why?" "I don't understand. I need a place to live. I'm ready to work. I thought you were back in business. Where's your lover?" "Jason, he betrayed me when someone asked me to ransom him. It wasn't true. He conspired with them, and I was just being played. Annie cried. "I see. Well, can I offer you a job as a milkmaid? It's all I've got." She stayed. It was better for her to live with her ex-husband than to try to start from scratch. Of course, Katie resented this arrangement, but she kept her feelings in check so as not to make herself and Jason unnecessarily jealous. It was almost 2 months before the birth, and everyone was looking forward to meeting the baby. Katie sewed diapers and bonnets. Jason had brought the crib and planned to assemble it soon. The twins were inventing new games and making rattles, which Barbara filled with fragrant herbs. Everyone had joy and anticipation of a miracle. Just not Annie. The dirty work made her appearance rougher and her character more withdrawn. Contrary to expectations, she did not leave. In her first month of hard labor, she continued to persevere on the farm, doing everything she was asked to do. On a winter evening, Katie sat at home. Her husband had left for town in the afternoon and must have decided to stay there until morning, for a blizzard was raging outside. The roads had turned to snowdrifts in a matter of hours, and the wind was howling drearily from the window. When she heard footsteps outside the door, Katie was glad that Jason had probably come home. He was always calmer with her. She'd been feeling sick to her stomach all day, and it was frightening. It was a few kilometers to the hospital, but Annie appeared at the door, wearing felt boots and a woolen shawl over her hat. "What happened to you?" Katie thought, remembering the diamond-clad beauty walking proudly down the corridor in heels. "Are you alone?" "It's cold," asked the guest. "What did you want?" "I wanted to tell you something that you might have guessed yourself that you don't understand." Katie tried to remain calm, her temples throbbing unpleasantly, and her stomach tugged unbearably again. "Oh, come on. I've never noticed Jason coming home late from work," Annie said with cold gloating. "He works hard," Katie replied, getting up from the couch and going to the window, hoping to see her husband. Unfortunately, there was nothing but thick darkness. "He wants a naive, stupid fool. I'm tired of running from him, though sometimes I can't help myself. I'll be honest with you." Annie smiled, pleased with the effect she was having on Katie, but soon the smile faded, replaced by alarm and, finally, horror as the pregnant woman suddenly grabbed her stomach and sat on the floor, letting out an inhuman scream. Annie ran up to her and tried to turn her around, but she pushed her away with force. "Get out!" Katie screamed, still holding her stomach. I'm dying. Should I call Barbara?" The milkmaid was completely freaked out. She hadn't gotten up in 2 days. Katie exhaled. The contraction passed, but the next one came. It was clear to both of them that labor had begun, and no one could help them. This frightening thought left Annie in a stupor. For several minutes she stood in the middle of the room, not knowing what to do or where to run. Finally, gathering her thoughts, she went to the closet, opened it, took out the sheets and spread them on the floor, moving Katie onto them. The forced midwife went to the kitchen and washed her hands thoroughly. Found a towel and diapers. Coming with a desire for revenge, Annie quickly realized her new role. There was no escape. All disagreements and grudges were best left for later. Katie cried, moaning, the cool compress on her forehead instantly warming. She was thirsty. Calling for Jason, her train of thought was more like the ramblings of a sick man. The night was going to be hard, endless, agonizing. The first thing Jason heard when he entered the house in the morning was the cry of a baby. His heart quickened. For a few moments he stood in the hallway as if afraid to move. The arrival of his daughter was a surprise he had not expected to receive that morning. It was no less of a surprise that Annie was giving birth to a girl. And Katie, covered in a warm blanket, was resting on the bed. She smiled and held out her hand to him. "How I thought it was early," Jason mumbled confusedly. She rushed at Katie, answered him in a weak voice. The experience of childbirth was a life-changing one, not only for the laboring woman herself, but also for her longtime detractor. We see the fear she experienced that night. Something changed in her soul. Annie became even more withdrawn and silent, and soon surprised everyone with a new decision. "I'm going into a convent. I've already written a letter, and I've been told they're waiting for me." "You've decided that?" Jason marveled. "You can't make it up. I need a secretary in the office right now. Thought I'd offer you one. No. It's already decided," she replied calmly. And after asking to be left alone with Katie, said, "I'm sorry for everything. I'm going away to absolve myself of my sins beforehand. I want to apologize right away. Jason, I didn't cheat on you. I made it up at the time to hurt you. I thought you were the cause of all my troubles, but you weren't." And she left, apparently finding herself in ministry. In letters, she regularly reported that she was living well. She promised to come visit by summer. It took Jason and Kathy a long time to get used to it, but in time they accepted it as it was. They named their daughter Barbara. The girl, with the same red hair and funny ears as her mother's, grew up to be a fun-loving, naughty girl. Especially her appearance pleased the twins. They did not dote on her. They fulfilled all requests and took her with them on important tasks, such as hammering apples or eating currants from the neighbors' bushes. In a few years, the farm had grown to the size of a large farm and was already bringing the owners a good income. The road they had built to the village carried daily loads of milk, eggs, hay, and straw. Jason, who had started with zero knowledge, was suddenly one of the most experienced farmers in the area, and he was very proud of it. Past sufferings lost their former meaning: a cozy and hospitable house, a friendly family. Now they had everything for real happiness.